There it is. Hello. Hey, what's up, guys? And welcome to the newest episode of the movie discussion, Pocket Dimension, where time does not exist and the only thing that matters is film. After a week off, we are back. I am Cole, joined by Jay, and for this week, we are into the third part of our small mini-series, whatever you want to call it, on the maverick filmmaker, the mysterious, and the beloved Orson Welles. So we started this with his noir film Touch of Evil from 1958, when he was fairly well established. Then we went back to what was the other one besides
The Third Man?
Right, The Third Man, which was not a film that he himself had directed or written, which makes it sort of the oddity of the group. But I wanted to focus on it because I think it's maybe his best acting performance. That's right, The Third Man from 1949, another noir-type film, although quite different from Touch of Evil. Now we're going back even further to his first and easily most famous film, 1941's Citizen Kane. And, it's one of those movies which it's been so celebrated and analyzed. It's like, what more can you even say about it? This is the Citizen Kane of films. Citizen Kane, right? As we talked about a little bit in the earlier episodes, I remember, while it has this crazy sterling reputation as one of the best films ever made, and sometimes often even said the very best film ever made, it didn't have that reputation right away. It was very well received, and everybody was quite impressed, although it didn't actually perform well at the box office. And it definitely established Welles as, a talent to watch. But it wasn't until probably around the time Touch of Evil came out in the later half of the 50s that the movie was sort of being reevaluated, particularly in Europe, as like a masterpiece, and then it would pretty much enjoy that reputation to the present day. So why is that? We're going to get into some. We're obviously going to talk about why that is. I think one of the number one things is just innovation. It's hard, especially now in 2019, watching a film that's so old, and with our eyes, and being able to recognize the things that made it special and innovative in its day. Because the fact is, this film introduced so many storytelling and narrative techniques that we just take for granted now.
Yeah.
They're just in every movie, even completely terrible ones use this. So that's something that really has to be understood about Citizen Kane, is that when it came along in 1941, it really did alter the landscape, the way films could tell stories. And a lot of it just seems so simple and obvious now, but the fact is, it wasn't. One that I think of right off the bat is that this movie makes extensive use of the montage, which really did not, I don't think, really existed in feature film before that. But there's at least 3 or 4 times where a montage is used to show the passing of time and to get an idea across, and it's done quite well. And I don't think other films have done this. And this isn't a massive epic. It's only a fairly average length movie, but I guess the other thing that's sort of astonishing is just how much story and development and character and everything they're able to pack into a movie like this. Because certainly epics that existed before this, like RKO, the studio that released it, we're going to talk about that in a minute too, had done, I think they were the ones that did, Gone with the Wind.
Oh, really?
Or maybe it wasn't RKO. But anyway, Gone with the Wind had come out a few years earlier. And that's definitely, was a big, huge movie of its day too. But it was an epic, clocking in at well over 3 hours and having some really complicated things going on. It like the burning of Atlanta, for instance. Whereas this movie is fairly normal scale, but it's more just the ideas and the story and the character that it conveys that makes it so big. But so getting back to RKO, which is sort of the forgotten studio. So we talked a little bit before about the old Hollywood. We talked about the pre-code Hollywood, which is sort of a mini era in itself. So basically the eras in Hollywood start with the Silent Age, which runs right up till about near the end of the 20s, really the release of The Jazz Singer in 1927, the first feature-length sound film is what ushered this in. And you could even say the golden age of Hollywood, which overlaps with that a little bit, and that's what this started towards the end of the silent era, but really kicked in once you had sound going. So mostly when you think about golden age, you think about the 30s, 40s, maybe first half of the 50s. And we've talked before about some of the things that, some of the attributes that films from this had. And most of it is, what everybody expects when they think golden age. It's the grandeur of old Hollywood. Everything was larger than life. Everything was sort of fantastic and artificial, because that's really what a lot of they were going for, because that's kind of the way people viewed movies. And then when we talked about the shift into the new Hollywood era, how the whole idea was movies were suddenly being made more realistic and coming down from the pedestal and being more gritty in real life and small in scale. But Citizen Kane is a great example of sort of, maybe not the height, but I don't know, but at least a significant part of the golden age. And anyway, getting back to what I meant was the studio system. So back in those days, the studio, there were basically 5 big major studios that controlled everything. And they all exist to this day, RKO being the weird one, because RKO basically stopped making films of its own, at least on a big scale, in the late 60s. And it's existed in various forms throughout the world, throughout history. And nowadays, it exists basically to tend to its own library of back catalog of movies to take care of copyright and stuff like that. But besides RKO, you had Fox, Paramount, Warner Brothers, and MGM. And all those are still there. And it was a much different landscape. All those studios each controlled various theater chains, so they kind of would have a monopoly on how their movies would get seen and distributed throughout the country. So it was all what's that word? Vertical integration, I guess would be the term, you know. And it was all very tightly controlled and very highly competitive between the studios, and it really was so regimented that, you know, for decades it kept any other studios from being able to, you know, start up and compete with them. They basically, as we said, had a monopoly. Now RKO was kind of the oddity. It was smaller than the others, and it did things kind of in a different way. And that's kind of how we wound up with a film as unique in its time, and to this day still unique as Citizen Kane, because obviously the major aspect of Citizen Kane is Orson Welles' unprecedented level of creative control on it. He was the lead actor, he wrote it, he produced it, he directed it, and he also signed a crazy contract that RKO gave him that no other studio would have ever dreamed of giving him, where he would have final cut, where he had control over all aspects of the story. He didn't even have to show executives any footage until he felt it was necessary to show it to them. He had final cut no matter what they said. He was able to himself select the cast and crew. So all this is, and in the time, they were both, because this so went against the grain of the way films were made, they were actually mocked in the press for this in the lead-up to the film coming out. But RKO had always done things a little bit differently. Probably the other big film they're most known for besides Citizen Kane is King Kong, which came out in 1933. But even though that's one of the great monster films, it was really Universal that would take the monster route. All those, you know, classic horror movies from the 30s and 40s, those are Universal, like Frankenstein, Dracula, The Mummy. Those are all Universal. So RKO had kind of a different thing going. And through the 30s, it was popular comedies and musicals. They did a whole bunch of those musicals in the 30s starring Fred Astaire. They also did a lot of those what are known as screwball comedies throughout the 30s. So they probably weren't seen as ambitious or serious as the other major studios at the time in the early 40s when they took on Welles. Now, we talked a little about Welles, and I don't want to repeat ourselves too much about it, but Welles had already he's only 25 at this point. He's already basically grown up as a prodigy, and he's been for the last several years since coming back from Europe, he's been sort of the darling of the theater world, putting on very avant-garde and daring performances. And even in the later 30s, he's already being courted by Hollywood, because I think this is a guy that, you know, could really do something in film and make a lot of money and get a lot of attention. And so even before the 1938 famous the broadcast of The War of the Worlds, which he did on radio, even before that, he was being courted. But after that, that's when he really became infamous, and RKO sought him very aggressively. And I guess that was maybe why he had some leverage in being able to sign this kind of contract with them. And again, it also had to do with the fact that RKO themselves, the way they were set up, also made it a little more possible for them to conduct business this way. They had kind of they had a very decentralized nature, the way that their company was set up. So anyway, basically what he got out of the contract. Let's see here. Let's see here. Complete artistic control, improvement. Anyway, it all hinges, as long as the budget didn't exceed $500,000, this would all kick in. They wouldn't be allowed to see footage without his approval. No cuts could be made without his approval. He could select his own crew, have the right to final cut. So anyway, yeah. So a very big risk they're taking, but they believed in Wells, and then Wells spent the next 5 months putting the movie together. But anything, yeah, you want to jump on here? I've kind of lost.
Yeah, I'll give you a break. Yeah, it was my first time to watch this, and it's one of the reasons I'm glad we did this, because it forced me to watch it. You know, obviously checklist film for everyone.
Right.
So it's one I've needed to watch for years. I've just kind of put it off, but I'm glad I did, and I really see the appeal. And it's like you said, if you don't realize that this kind of, it set the standard for a lot of things that is still common in films, and did things so revolutionary in the industry, and just techniques and everything. And it's it's the #1 film on the AFI's list. It's actually number 4 on Rotten Tomatoes, if you can believe it or not. I was just looking at some lists that it was on, but it's another film on the 1,000 Films to Watch Before You Die.
Yeah,
and
it's always on the Sight and Sound list.
It's on pretty much every greatest films ever made.
They update about every 10 or 12 years. They update the list, and some things move around and shift. Mm-hmm. And it's moved around, but it's always been on the list. Obviously, mm-hmm. It's always been a big deal. But yeah, and getting into some of the things that made it revolutionary, it's funny now because a lot of it had to do with Wells's own ignorance when it came to filmmaking at the time. Since it was his first film, there's a lot of stuff he didn't know. So it meant there were things he didn't know he couldn't or shouldn't do. I've got just a little snippet here of an interview where somebody said, what I'd like to know, there's the interviewer, like to know is where did you get the confidence from which to make a film with such, and then he gets cut off. And Wells says, ignorance, sheer ignorance. There's no confidence to equal it. It's only when you know something about a profession. I think that you're timid or careful, and they say, how did this ignorance show itself? Wells, I thought you could do anything with a camera that the eye could do, or the imagination could do. And if you come up from the bottom in the film business, you're taught all the things that the cameraman doesn't want to attempt for fear he'll be criticized for having failed. And in this case, I have cameramen who didn't care if he was criticized if he failed, and didn't know there were things you couldn't do. So anything I could think up in my dreams, I attempted to photograph. You got away with an enormous technical advances, didn't you? Simply by not knowing they were impossible, well, theoretically impossible. So that's where some of it came from. He didn't, not having come up in the film industry yet, he just took some things for granted, and they tried some things that hadn't been tried and wound up working out.
It's unbelievable this guy was only 25 when he made this film.
Yeah, that's really what stands out. Not just that he made it, but how well, we'll get into the performance too, but how well he plays an older man is astonishing, really. Mm-hmm. Sure, they have some makeup effects to make him look older, but just having the bearing of an older man, an accomplished man, a very rich and influential man, it's incredible. It's like a complete transformation, and that's one of the things I love about the film is, now, it's not a very long film, so you only get a little bit of young Kane, and then you get into the older. But just seeing the transformation is really startling. And then you think, yeah, this is a 25-year-old actor in his first ever feature film performance. Now, again, he has been acting. He acted in theater just as much as he produced and directed there. So it's not like he never acted, but still, it's really impressive.
Very. It's like his opus, right out of the gate.
Yeah,
that's not normally how it works.
Yeah. And as he said, he spent the rest of his life not being able to top it, and having everything he did being held and compared to it for the rest, which is somewhat of a curse. I can understand that for sure. But I think sometimes that does get overplayed a bit, because I do think he made a lot of good quality stuff for the rest of it afterwards too. But yeah, it's also notable, again, that the unique position he was in. We talk about the technological advances. It's also because RKO was maybe the most sophisticated studio at the time in terms of technicians and special effects artists, because they actually had kind of an emphasis on fantasy in a lot of their movies, which required a more technical approach for some of their movies. So again, it's just sort of a case of being in the right place at the right time. But yeah, it's highly unlikely that any of the other studios could have made this film, which nowadays is seen as sort of the prototypical auteur film, which would foreshadow the new Hollywood movement, several decades later. You have a lot of these younger filmmakers 20, 25 years later saying, I want to do what Orson Welles did. And to this day, there's still people that will say that. I'm sure he'll remain, a legend in the field. But yeah, RKO, I got really interested in reading stuff about them just because they're kind of an anomaly in the studio system, so different from the others. And it's kind of too bad what happened to them, losing their money. And by the 60s, they were just basically producing B movies. And then after that, I don't know, the company existed, but not really as a film studio anymore. By the end of the 50s, I think they've lost all their back lots and stuff like that. There was no shooting. But yeah, RKO, I always thought was really interesting, and it can't be overstated that it was really essential to this movie getting made in the way that it was because of RKO sort of having some of its own unique qualities. But yeah, let's see. Yeah, but basically it began its decline only a few years later, really, right after World War II. Yeah, all the studios suffered, but it suffered kind of the most. And actually, and Howard Hughes owned it for a while too. And we all know that Hughes was kind of nuts, and he did some interesting things with it, including shutting it down temporarily when there was pressure from Senator Joseph McCarthy during his communist witch hunts, which really strongly affected Hollywood and all medium of art. People have heard me talk about have the comic code and stuff, and we won't get into that. But anyway, getting back to this film. Speaking of Howard Hughes, this film is kind of interesting because it is, it's a character study of a very rich, powerful, and influential man, and of course, and also in it somewhat of an indictment of the newspaper industry of the era. Mm-hmm. And what's funny about that is, Kane is obviously an amalgamation of several real life people, but the most obvious one was the millionaire. William Randolph Hearst, who of course himself was a newspaper magnate. And even before the film came out, because Hearst had his power and influence, he knew that this was going to say some stuff probably about him indirectly. And he didn't like it. And some of the reason this movie didn't do so well financially has to do directly with Hearst's own interference in manipulating the press to do that. So what's funny is Hearst proves the movie's point in real life by saying, we have people here that think they're above people and they can control the news. And you have, that line that that Kane says when she says, people will think, and he says, people will think what I tell them to think, which is very much, what Wells is saying, what these newspaper magnates were, and these people that control the media were saying. I control the media, so I control popular opinion, so I really control everything that's going on here. And, all these decades later, we still live in a very similar world where now there's more news, there's a lot more of the newspapers going on now. There's media everywhere. And it's led to a public that has become very mistrusting of media because we realize, we found out now, people have certain interests when it comes to this, and they will alter the news to suit it sometimes. So now people talk about fake news and all that, and that pisses me off. But at the same time, I do understand it to a certain extent because there are people out there, deliberately manipulating the news. And of course, it's also led to various news outlets having completely different spins, right? Like MSNBC or whatever they're called, the way they report news is completely different from the way, say, Fox reports news. They have their own angles and they have their own skewed viewpoints, and it all really comes back to power, influence, and money. Well, who owns it, who controls it, blah, blah, blah. So even though this movie is so old and so different from today's world, it still makes some points that are still very poignant today about controlling a media empire and the amount of influence you would really wield with it. And that's only more true nowadays, really.
that was one of the things that was so striking to me is how relevant it is, and spoilers for everyone, we're going to spoil the hell out of this film.
Yeah.
But it seems so like, I know William Randolph Hearst was the main guy it was modeled after, right? But
Yeah.
it seems like a very Trumpy type character too, doesn't it?
It does.
Does it not come across that way? Like, that's what I was thinking the whole time I was watching it. I was like, man,
Yeah.
this guy's
Funny
like
because
Donald Trump.
what's interesting is how he swings between, being very human and likable,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then into very, people, and then you get sort of the Trump caricature there,
Yeah.
right? Like, I will control how people view me, and,
Mm-hmm.
I'm above people and they'll do what I tell them to do. And it's really important that they see me as this and that and the other thing. So yeah, it is kind of interesting all these decades earlier, how much you can relate it to what's going on right now. But I like the character for that too, because like you don't just see him being like mean and manipulative and crazy. You also see the human side. You also see that he started out fairly idealistically. This is a man, he inherited his wealth, but he didn't inherit the newspaper. He chose that.
Mm-hmm.
What happened was like he could have just done sort of nothing, and they're listing off all these assets, and he said, that newspaper, that's what interests me. I think I'd like to run a newspaper. That'd be fun. And some of it even. We just talked about Wells's own ignorance of the film media. Some of that is mirrored in the movie because the idea is like he starts sort of a revolution in print media because he doesn't really know anything about it. He didn't go to journalism school or anything like that, or come up through a family or from a family-owned paper. He's just stepping into it and just trying things out. And some of it's revolutionary in a good way, and some of it's a bad way. He started what was known at the time as yellow journalism, which is, which we still see to this day, stuff like the National Enquirer, which is, just making wild accusations and throwing them out there, and stuff without really hard facts or proof to back it up, which is not ideal, but it does help prove the point of the power of the media because, while he's getting scoffed at when the guy tells him, that won't fly. You need facts and stuff, but it shows that he's savvy enough to know that, well, maybe for part of the audience, but you know what? There's a big part of the audience out there that does not give a shit about facts, and they'll just believe whatever we read. And, the more lurid and crazy we can make the headline, the more they'll eat it up. Mm-hmm. And again, that seems very similar to today. A lot of people just making wild claims and accusations, and it's just like, well, what about the facts? Facts don't really so much matter. It's more about the headline.
Yeah, if it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah, first thing I learned in journalism school, which I did attend. But yeah,
oh yeah, so you've got like an inside scoop on this.
To a certain extent, I suppose. I don't think I learned any great truths that would really shock or surprise anybody or anything like that.
Well, I guess we can start at the beginning if you want.
Right. So speaking of spoilers, of course, I'm just like you and everybody, most people seeing this for the first time already know the big twist.
Yes, I did, and I wish I didn't. But
it's almost unavoidable. Yeah. It's the movie's been around for so long and had such a huge impact on pop culture. There's been parodies. Like, we've heard everywhere that Rosebud is the sled. There's no getting away from that. So when I finally, saw the movie, I was a little surprised how prevalent the sled is right in the first few scenes.
Yeah.
Although certainly that makes sense. At least that way you don't feel like you're cheated when you see the movie's over. I guess you're like, okay, yeah, he did like that sled. He was holding on to it, and as soon as he let go of the sled, he let go of his old life and had to go into his new life. So I get that, but yeah, you want to talk about spoilers? That was something that was spoiled for, I don't know, pretty much everybody at some point. At some point, this was spoiled.
Yeah, I don't know how or when or where, but I did know that. I knew, very little about the film, but I did know that.
Yeah, they do directly like there's a Family Guy episode that like says it out loud, but I mean, way before I saw that, I knew it anyway. Because there's a Family Guy episode where like it shows like they reference how Peter got banned from the video store because he kept taping over the movies, and it shows like somebody about to put on Citizen Kane. He gets the part where he goes Rosebud, then suddenly the picture cuts out and it's Peter filming himself, and it's like it was his sled. It was his sled. There, I just saved you 2 boobless hours or something like that. But I mean, so there's one right there. But I mean, I knew it well before I saw that episode. So it's just been all over the place in various media talking about the sled Rosebud.
Finally getting to watch it, it's so crazy how often it's referenced, in other things. Like, and I get it now. It's like pretty much everything I've seen, it's referenced Citizen Kane one way or another. Like,
Yeah.
from The Simpsons to, anything pop culture wise.
Yeah. And so many like characters have been
Mm-hmm.
like at least roughly based on Kane himself.
Mm-hmm. And it's somewhat autobiographical, right? Like with the origin of him being, I guess, transferred over to his mentor, whatever you want to call that, father figure person.
Yeah, that's true because in Wells's case, it wasn't like that his family was suddenly rich. It was that he was discovered to be a very talented
Mm-hmm.
individual and somewhat of a prodigy that they thought, oh, we should send him to this special school that encourages, creative types. And yeah, it was there that he met the headmaster who would become his mentor for the rest of his life, really, and really encourage his creative projects. So yeah, that's true too. And there's a ton of Wells himself put into the movie, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And it shows. And the earnestness of it is something I think that you can really, I think also makes it a little different. I hate to say it, but there's a lot of movies in the 40s that just have sort of like, especially if you see it through our lens, that has sort of like a corny artificialism to them.
Mm-hmm.
They don't even seem to really be trying to be acting. They're just sort of like barking out their lines like, it's all like, type thing. This movie doesn't have that,
Right.
which is nice. Like everything feels like a very genuine performance. And I think some of that probably came from his theater background again, because he was like, well, we're going to do the acting style that I know, which is, more of a theater realistic thing. We're not going to do the, it's a talking picture, blah, 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 get your lines in type thing that they had so much of in the 40s.
Well, that's kind of one of the things that puts me off about films from that era is it's like they do a lot of overacting.
There's a lot of that, films like His Girl Friday and stuff like that. Everybody's like too clever. Everybody always has like a perfect comeback and everything. It's always like a super like quick, well-rehearsed banter going on between them. And I mean, I get it. It is funny. Sometimes it makes for a good, funny delivery, but it also, again, it makes it somewhat artificial and not really feel like you're watching anything real. That it's like, it's it's all just a show, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, this movie is very, very genuine in its delivery from all the actors, which I'm sure is something he probably stressed to the other actors. Or maybe he didn't have to, because again, these are as it says when the credits are about to roll, that a lot of these actors hadn't worked in film before. It says so. RKO is proud to introduce. That's what it shows when it shows the credits. It says that most of them are new to the world of film, which is startling again when you look at the quality. But I love how the film opens, because it opens almost like a Universal horror picture. Like, it looks like the opening of one of those really gothic horror movies, because it shows his Xanadu, and it's all up on the mountain, and you have the monkeys and the darkness and stuff. It's really great. This idea of a man that is like just totally given into excess, that has so much money that he just throws it around just to make basically statements with it. So he constructs Xanadu, which is like the ultimate monument to himself and his own ego, and like this huge private zoo with so many animals and stuff like that. Again, it was always about perception, trying to put on a face to the world so the world would see him as somebody truly great, I guess, and sort of struggling under the weight of what he created for himself. Because we see this is a man that could have sort of done anything with his life and chose this route and kind of winds up being consumed by it. Like, he does accomplish great things, but there's also the personal cost.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the film has one of those cool newsreels, which really gives you a good idea of sort of the cliff notes for what his life was like. And again, that's somewhat dated now, but that in 1941, that was really how people got all sorts of news. You go to the theater to see a movie, and beforehand they'd have some newsreels to tell you about the big stories of the day. Obviously, they'd have ones all about World War II while that was going on, to let you know how the troops were doing, et cetera, et cetera. Propaganda being a huge, huge thing. Film was just really coming into its own to be harnessed as a really great tool for propaganda. And there's some subtext of that too in the movie again, as we talk about the media and perception versus reality, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, you get a pretty good newsreel there, giving giving the beats of his life, his rise in the newspaper industry, and of course how he had a setback just like everybody else during the Great Depression, had to sell off various papers, but then bouncing back. It's pretty interesting. So the film follows a journalist who's trying to solve the mystery of the last word, Rosebud. I don't know how everybody knows his last word. I guess that nurse that came into the room heard it and blabbed it to everybody. Even though, like,
saying Rosebud.
It's funny though. I mean, he does the great death scene. Rose drops the thing. There's that great camera angle showing, her reflection in the ball as she comes in through the room. She doesn't seem at all surprised or worried. She's like, "Oh, he finally died." And she just sort of like calmly like puts the blanket over him, something like that. Because I think I pictured it differently, where she would have been in earshot and she'd be like, "Rosebud, what's Rosebud, Mr. Kane?" But like he's already gone and she's completely accepted that he's dead. So
yeah,
not a big deal or anything like that. It was just a little bit different from how I imagined it. Like everybody seems to know this Rosebud thing, even though he seemed to be in the room alone when he said it. But whatever.
Yeah.
So, like a lot of movies in the day, there's a lot of movies from the era too, where if there is a sort of main character or a character that drives the action, they're often a journalist, and this guy's a journalist, and he goes about it sort of in a methodical way, where he's trying to look into the archives that he can find about his life and interviewing people that knew him best. A scene towards the beginning that I really liked is when he goes to that guy's library, and it's and this is somewhat artificial, but I love the scope it creates, and we talked about some other movies from earlier that have influenced this sort of look, like Metropolis. Remember how big that lobby was? It's just this massive empty lobby with just one lone desk, and you hear the footsteps just echoing off the floor, and in the middle of the desk there's that really curt woman talking to him, and you can tell it's a set that they made, that it's not real, but I just love the overwhelming feel of size and scale and oppression that just sort of rains down on you from it, that you would see that in later movies too, and to a certain extent in another Orson Welles film that I really like a lot, The Trial, which sort of has stuff like that in it too, which is sort of about being overwhelmed by big, harsh, unfeeling environments, kind of man-made and very intimidating. So that's just a small moment in the film, but it's actually one of my favorites because I just really love the set design there. It's so stark and oppressive and intimidating.
Well, the sound too. You can tell that he pays a lot of attention to the sound design.
All aspects, really. This movie only won one Oscar, but it was nominated for 9.
Wow.
The only one it won was Best Original Screenplay. Although it's one of those ones where, if there was a do-over, it probably would have won more. I'm trying to remember what actually won Best Picture. I think it was How Green Was My Valley won Best Picture or something, which is I haven't seen, but most people would say is certainly not a superior film to Citizen Kane.
Yeah, and I'm sure some of the, Randolph Hearst, threatening to call everybody a commie if the film comes out and stuff didn't help.
Exactly. It didn't, but again, it just so beautifully illustrates the point that Wells is making, with this portrayal, which is so funny. He's doing exactly what he said he basically expected him to do. But Hearst, and I mean Hearst was a massive figure in the 20th century who would, have a ton of power and influence throughout the decades. I don't remember when he died, but the whole thing in the 70s about his was it his daughter or his grandniece getting kidnapped, remember, by that radical terrorist group, Patty Hearst. Yeah, I mean that's why they kidnapped her, because she was heir to his fortune. And then she became radicalized or whatever by that group. So yeah, Hearst was around for a long time, and Hearst also in the 40s is one of the main figures responsible for why, for so many decades, there was always this sort of backlash against marijuana in the United States and the criminalization of it. It's because he saw hemp as a cheaper sort of alternative to a lot of his paper mills and stuff like that.
Mhm.
So he basically financed a smear campaign against marijuana to demonize it as much as possible. And again, that had a lingering effect for decades, where people just growing up in the U.S. were like taught very early on, marijuana is a bad drug and it does bad things to you, and people who do it are criminals. Reefer madness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know when you smoke a joint, you jump out of like a 10-story window, right?
Yeah,
That's what you do immediately.
Yeah, you just start hallucinating. You start hallucinating pink elephants, and you stab everybody, and But I mean, he really wanted to push that because he basically he was worried about what it could do to his paper production. So again, this was a very powerful and influential man, just like Kane himself in the movie. But yeah, this was a very stylistic film for its era, setting up the auteur period with a lot of its cinematography, the framing, and the sometimes where the camera, the way it moves and stuff. Particularly early on, I find the first half is a little more artsy than the second half. Since I watched it again today, I kind of noticed that. Not that it like falls off or anything like that. I think that's just because it becomes more story driven as the movie goes on. And if people are saying, okay, well, what is the answer then? Why is this often seen as the best movie? It's hard to nail down, but in maybe the simplest terms, I would just say sort of its narrative structure and how efficiently it's able to like tell this story without really resorting to sort of any bells and whistles. In many ways, it's very simple and straightforward, but in other ways, in its delivery, it's very artistic and different. Again, you have to compare it to films from its era, because so many films would just borrow and outright steal from it in the decades since, with some very simple techniques. Like I said, some of this stuff is so like simple that we take it for granted. We don't even really think about there being a first time. A good example is in 1954, Kurosawa's most famous film, The Seven Samurai. It has a moment where near the beginning of the film, where they're first introducing each of the samurai that are getting recruited for the job for the village. Well, one of them is introduced. There's this whole episode about how he's in a different village, and he's trying to, basically the people of the village are relying on him to get this girl back. This like disturbed criminal guy has taken like a little girl hostage and taken her into like a little shed, and then nobody can get him to come out, and they're all worried about the girl. And they use this samurai. They say, we need you to get, and he manages to rescue the girl. What's different about that from the time is before that was like the first use of that kind of introduction for a character, where a character being introduced into a plot by using an episode that actually doesn't have anything to do with the main plot, which is something we've seen a million times since. Here's to give us an idea what this character's like. Here he is doing something not related to the plot, just to know what he's like. Now he'll come into the main plot. Like that was like the first instance of that in like major cinema. So it's kind of the same way with some of the stuff in Kane. The montage is one. It's not the first movie to use flashbacks, but it might be the first movie where, or at least the first major movie, where the entire narrative is basically held together through a series of flashbacks. So that's another thing too. See, those things seem so simple and obvious to us now, but at the time they were somewhat innovative. So that's some of the answer, I guess. And again, I think a lot of it has to do with Wells's own performance, which is just so amazing to think this is a 25-year-old guy who is so convincingly playing this character as he ages and changes. It's a really startling transformation, which the first time they do it with a montage, right? They have to show like sort of the deterioration of his first marriage. He's coming home and he's at the table with his wife. And at first, the first few conversations are lighthearted and he's talking about how much fun he's having. But then as it goes, it gets more and more grim. Suddenly, like, he's very frosty and cold talking to her, and he's very detached, and he's become and the way he looks has changed too. He's become a lot more stiff, and the way he's dressed, and he's got sort of the mustache to make himself more intimidating. You see that through like 5 or 6 different instances through a really well done montage, because it's always in the same place. They're in the same places at the same table, but they show over the progression of time, the way he changes and the way it changes their relationship. and it's just done really well. And again, we've seen that in a million movies since, but this is one of the first times, and it's one of the best instances.
So I guess we can go on to when he's running for mayor. Is that what he's running for?
I think he's running for governor.
Governor. Okay, it is governor. Okay.
Yeah, so of course the movie has to have some stuff about politics in it too.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and again, it's something we're sort of used to seeing in all the time since too. We have a powerful, influential man that has no background in politics, but since he's in a position to do so, he thinks, hey, I'll get into politics.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's almost seen as a logical next step for so many people, like, wealthy, powerful men. Even if they don't have a background in politics, it's like, well, why not enter politics? I've got, the resources to do it. I already wield a certain amount of influence. Think about how much more I could influence if I was, had this political position, in this case, governor.
Right.
So, yeah. And it seems like the guy he's running against really is crooked, and he even calls him boss, right, alleging his criminal ties, which is pretty ballsy.
And he's going to win until they out his relationship with another lady, Susan.
Right.
And they basically smear him in the campaign, and he loses because of that.
Yeah.
And I guess we can just skip through all that because really his wife leaves him, and he then starts a relationship with Susan.
Right. It's supposed to show, I guess, sort of his stubbornness, right?
Right.
Like, you get the idea. This was a dalliance. Things were getting bad between him and his wife, and now here's a young, pretty girl that likes him, who doesn't know who he is, which he finds refreshing, right?
Right,
like
right.
He likes that she doesn't. He's so used to everybody knowing who he is. He's Charles Foster Kane. He's the man. Everybody, he's loved and hated, but he's known. She doesn't know him, and he likes that. And you get the idea that probably this wouldn't have been a serious thing, but since it has these repercussions of breaking up his marriage and ruining the government, he feels like he has to stick with her now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also, he has to prove, well, then it wasn't for nothing. So he has to build her up into something, because she says she wants to sing. So he's going to make her be this great opera singer, even though she does not have the talent or really even the ambition to do so.
Mm-hmm.
So it's supposed to show sort of like his stubbornness there, right? Like, I don't make mistakes. I lost the governorship and screwed up my marriage, but it's because, I'm with this beautiful, talented, up-and-coming singer. So he pours as much effort and money as he can to do it. He opens a $3 million opera house in Chicago just for her. $3 million in 1941 is like a staggering amount of money. I don't even know what that would be now, but it would be like over 20 million, maybe 30 million. Crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And stuff. So that's really what it's supposed to do, I guess, is just to sort of show his stubbornness and how he feels the need to, again, it's about controlling the narrative of his life. And he's showing people, well, I didn't do this for nothing. She's a great talent. And of course, and he drives her to exhaustion and desperation in trying to prove it, making her sort of humiliate herself every night. And what we get there is all the other papers giving her, bad reviews, and his own paper at first not doing it. Then, of course, somebody in his own paper is like, I have to write the truth here. And Kane is mad about this, of course, fires the guy, but then winds up finishing the negative review and printing it anyway.
Mm-hmm. Leland, is that who that was? The guy that wrote it? Okay.
I believe that was Leland, yeah.
But, rewind just a little bit to where they meet. And she's apparently, messed up on tooth medicine, or she's got some filling. Yeah.
She must be coming from the dentist or something.
Yeah, some drug she's on. And she's
nitrous oxide or something.
Yeah. And he gets splashed with mud in the face, which, terrible thing for such a, rich, notorious guy.
Very undignified.
Yeah, exactly. And then she laughs at him. Like, what are you laughing at? Come upstairs for some cold water. And, I think he thinks that she's a prostitute, right? Is that kind of the impression you got?
I don't know. I mean, he obviously thinks she's very low class.
But, come upstairs to my apartment,
Yeah.
But, anyway.
But then he just winds up being somewhat charmed by her because, she's sort of like a commoner or whatever.
Yeah.
Right? And also that she actually doesn't know who he is, which he finds somewhat refreshing because he's just so used to everybody knowing who he is and immediately judging him without even knowing him because he's become this larger-than-life figure.
She's like a simpleton.
Right.
commoner.
Right. So you get the idea that it's like, if he's having an affair with her, but it's not really serious. But then when it all blows up in his face, he has to make it serious. So that's why he really digs in and tries to turn her into this great opera singer, because he wants to prove that he's with somebody really great and worthy when she's, just an ordinary person with maybe some singing talent.
That's one thing I didn't catch that. I didn't realize that he now has to double down, and now he's committed to this relationship. I didn't make that connection.
Well, yeah, it really explains like why he would drive her to this, and of course she winds up even attempting suicide.
That's how she gets out of it.
Yeah, and then he's like, okay, I'll leave her alone, and then she just leaves anyway. Because by then, now they're living in Xanadu at this point, and she feels so cut off from the rest of the world, and she's just like constantly putting puzzles together because she has nothing else to do.
Yeah, and
he doesn't want to go back to New York or anything because he's had his failures there.
Well, she's either like on drugs or drinking all the time, or she's out of it. She's completely out of it. She doesn't know if it's AM or PM.
No, she's completely out of it.
It's once they retreat to the Xanadu, the hermit that is Xanadu. It kind of all goes downhill for their relationship there.
Yeah, the rest of the world falls away.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And she's pretty broken.
She's like the only complaint I have about the film. That character's really annoying to me.
I get that.
Her voice is like nails on a chalkboard, and her singing voice is not great either.
I mean, that is supposed to be part of it, though, right? The whole point is she is not a talented singer. He's trying to like show the world that she's this talented singer, and he's giving her all the best things. She has instruction, but the fact is, she just doesn't have it. She doesn't have the talent, and she even knows that. And she feels embarrassed, but he's forcing this on her.
Sure. But I mean, it's almost like she was trying to be like it was all his fault, the bad reviews were his fault. But I mean, he had, confidence that you could do it. You wanted to do it. You did it, and you got bad reviews. That's not necessarily his fault,
No, but she gets to a point where she's just like, you control everything. So why don't you control these reviews too? Like, don't let them say that stuff. Because she's also seen the side of him where he's not always necessarily interested in truth. He's just interested, again, in creating his own narrative. So she starts to resent him for that. It's like, you put me on this pedestal, you put me in the spotlight, so why can't you control what they're saying about me and stuff? And he's just like, reality's reality. Well, again, it is his fault. He did instigate it.
So do you really think he didn't have any feelings for her at all? He's just like this man that's not capable of love?
I don't know about not capable, but I just feel like he probably saw her as a dalliance, but then, again, felt that he had to try to legitimize it.
But, I mean, it seemed like he was upset when she left,
Yeah, but to me that's kind of a standard thing for somebody kind of in that position. Because, it's lonely at the top, blah, blah, blah. And, like here was somebody that was at least somewhat close to him. And now that she's gone, he really doesn't have anybody. And I know you could say, well, he's, a super eligible bachelor.
Right.
But
I guess like a control freak. Like, he's not able to control that aspect.
Sure. So, I mean, he must have had some genuine affection for her, I'm sure.
Well, the whole, the famous, destroying the room scene.
Yeah, he's definitely...
Seemed like... He's just pissed off that she left, not that, I lost Susan, the love of my life. Like, damn it, she left,
I guess it's open to interpretation. You could either say, he's really broken up about it, or he just didn't like that somebody defied him.
Mm-hmm.
So there's you can look at it both ways, and you could say maybe it even is a combination of both. Because that's the other thing that really makes the movie, is that he's a complex character.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in some ways, it's a somewhat predictable arc. Sure, he's this little boy that starts with nothing, and then he's this young playboy that can do whatever he wants and wants to try things out in journalism, and winds up kind of revolutionizing it. Then he becomes such a powerful political figure, and then all this stuff that it starts to really change him as a person, where he just becomes really lonely and isolated from the world and looking down on the world. And so in some ways that's a kind of a predictable arc, but just the way it's played is very believable, and again, not to overuse the word, but genuine, I think. Really like how he does it, his delivery and everything.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, he was running for governor of New York. But yeah, backing up again a little bit, talking about the political aspect of it. Like the first time he really does sort of get political is once he's got his media empire up and running, and what he decides to really push, not only to sell papers but also to like build up his own reputation, is he builds on this wave of patriotism that he tries to take advantage of, trying to spur, saying, we're going to go to war with the Spanish. This is before the war actually breaks out, but people are talking about it happening. And he's saying it should definitely happen. America number one. Let's get this going. Spanish-American War, which happened in I think 1898, which I don't know a lot about, but I know that that's why Spain lost control of the Philippines, and that's how the U.S. got control of the Philippines until the middle of the 20th century. So I know that much happened with the Spanish-American War. But yeah, so this is the first time he's really decided to try to manipulate public opinion in a way that will really try to boost himself up, to try to show that he's like this really patriotic American, a man of the people, et cetera, et cetera. And that's when he really starts to wield a lot of real influence along with, his normal, financial power. And he has that, and he also shows that he's really different from a lot of the rich, powerful men that had come before him, because of the way he sort of celebrated himself, and his wealth was probably, I think would be looked down on from like some of the more old money crowd, like that sort of party he gives for himself with the newspaper guys. He has the dancing girls come in and sing the song about him. They all eat it up and stuff. But this is a different kind of rich man. You didn't really see that in the past. He's like, yeah, it's all about me. Type thing. And again, this is something he just sort of had. It's almost like it's an image he created, and he had to double down on it. He had to keep it going because that's what people expected from him. And so you get the feeling that's why he made Xanadu.
Right.
Like I have to keep this whole thing going, the excess and public life and etc.
Who would be the modern day equivalent, do you think, like of just someone who's that successful, like a Bill Gates type person? I don't know.
Yeah, it would probably have to be somebody like Bill Gates, but it would still be more extreme than Bill Gates, because Bill Gates never chose to really try to wield too much political influence.
True.
I mean, he's had his causes and he's done things and stuff like that, but he's never felt the need, maybe because he didn't want to or whatever, to like try to really step into it. I mean, I guess maybe but the closest I can think of is maybe Rupert Murdoch.
Okay.
Because, Rupert Murdoch controls a media empire.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe him.
I was thinking like George W. Bush or someone, like came from old money,
Yeah. But Kane didn't come from old money, right?
Right.
Like he just came from an ordinary family that happened upon like a fortune. Like there was gold on their property or something, and the fortune was managed so well that it kept growing, and then he made it even bigger with his investments and stuff like that. So that's one of the reasons he was different, right? There was a lot of old money, especially in this era. This would be the late 19th century, early 20th century, where so much of the wealth in America was old money.
Is that like Vanderbilts and Rockefellers and stuff?
Yeah, and Hearst and all that stuff. And they don't talk about it too much in the movie, but something that was going on too was like the way the old money crowd kind of looked down on the new money. This is really highlighted in, do you ever read, what is it? The Great Gatsby?
Mm-hmm.
Like the Great Gatsby's like all about that, right? Like the idea is that Gatsby, nobody even really knows how he came into the money. And he's throwing all these parties. And the idea is like the old money crowd look down on him. They think of him as undignified. It's like, that's no way for a rich man to act and stuff. Like, and how'd you even get your money? So that's kind of the prevailing thought in probably this era. But they don't have too much of it in this movie itself. You don't really see like other like rich people really talking about it and stuff. But that was very much the climate. It's funny, things have changed so much financially, like the way we view the rich now and the way then. Like in like 1941-ish, a private American citizen with a massive fortune was almost seen as kind of a quaint thing, because there weren't very many of them left. Because you have to remember, there was World War I, the Spanish flu epidemic, then the stock market crash, and then World War II, all within a 25-year period. And this sapped a lot of the world's wealth. A lot of the old rich lost their money in various various ways. We can't get into it, but I'm not too great at socio-economic stuff to begin with. But you got to understand the ripple effect these things all cause. So by the time you get to like 1941, there's not too many of these individuals left. And they're kind of seen almost as a relic of the old world. They have no idea that we're going to go in the next few decades. It's going to become a big thing where all sorts of people are going to start having private fortunes. That's actually funny. It's something that is reflected upon. So just a couple of months ago or whatever, it's going to be the 1000th issue of Detective Comics, and it's the 80th anniversary. The first Detective Comics came out in of the Detective Comics number 27, which is Batman's first appearance, which was in 1939. So it's been 80 years, and that's the other reason why like Batman's origin works to a better extent back then maybe than it does today. Because you think about today and the way class is viewed and privilege and all that stuff, the idea of a billionaire using his wealth and privilege so that he can beat the shit out of people he deems to be criminals kind of doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound heroic. It kind of sounds like an overprivileged brat, like, doing what coming down on society's lowest classes because he can. But none of that would have existed back in 1941 because the idea of Bruce Wayne, playboy millionaire, again, was sort of a quaint idea because it's like, oh, how droll kind of thing. Because you didn't really have like a lot of rich private citizens with their, figuratively, with their boots on the necks of the lower classes. So the balance has really changed now, which is kind of funny. So yeah. So at the time that Kane's character would have been around, he would have been seen as a curiosity. Because nowadays there's people out there that aren't even famous that are super rich.
Right.
You find out, oh wow, they own this and that and the other thing. Never even fucking heard of them,
Mm-hmm.
and stuff. But back then, the wealth was not as spread around, I guess.
There was more space between the classes, I guess. Maybe. Like there was.
Yeah, because the big thing that happened in the 50s was the emergence of a middle class in North America, right? Like the idea that and that was what was really pushed hard in the 50s about being a good time, because instead of being rich and poor, now there were people, it's like, yeah, you're not rich, you're an ordinary guy, but you can have a car,
mm-hmm.
and you can have a decent house and stuff like that. So this is before all that, where it's really working class and wealthy, and then a very, very small sphere of ultra wealthy, which Kane's character would have been part of. So that's another interesting sort of standpoint to view the movie through, is like, the way that kind of context has changed over the decades in regards to, division of wealth and class and all that. So that's why I think it is hard to come up with a modern day equivalent. But I think somebody like Rupert Murdoch is somewhat close because he controls the media empire and certainly wields a lot of power and influence.
Or what's the guy that used to own Facebook?
Oh yeah, Zuckerberg. Mark
Zuckerberg. Yeah.
I mean, Zuckerberg's still so young. I guess a lot of his story still has to be written, right?
Yeah, I mean, I could see him like running for office for something, later in his life.
It very much could happen. Because I mean, that's another interesting point. Like, you have somebody that makes like a fantastic, impossible fortune before they're even like 30. You think, what are they going to do with the rest of your life? You can do anything, but at the same time, most people that do that, they don't want to fade into the background. I'm different. I definitely would. I can't tell you how much I would just love to make a bunch of money doing one thing and then just sort of retreat and just sort of do kind of what I want from then on. I would not want to be a public figure. I would not want to wield political influence or power or be known or any of that. But, But that's kind of what a lot of the rich are taught, really. I mean, think of all the richest people like out there. Like, well, what are they doing right now? They're accumulating more wealth.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any reason for them to? No, it's just that's what they do.
Using their money to make more money.
Yeah, it's what they do. It wouldn't occur to them to stop. I'm not saying they should stop. I'm not going to get into that, although a lot of people think they should. Leave some for the rest of us. I am the 1%, et cetera, et cetera. Or the 99%.
Yeah.
Cool, yeah, so that's the other thing, right? Like, nowadays we talk about how like America is controlled, really the top, the 1%, controls most of the wealth. it was a bit more balanced back in the day of this. It wasn't quite as, still was never good. There's always been a divide in rich and poor going back to fucking ancient times. But the divide wasn't quite what it was. I think like in 1941, I don't even know if people could conceive of a billionaire. A billionaire, really? Before you and I are dead, there's probably going to be a trillionaire or two.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Which is just almost impossible to fathom. Now, I mean, time marches on and money's lost its value. $1,000 is not what it was in 1940 or even 1980 and stuff. But I mean, still, it just keeps going up, right? So we've got billionaires. I mean, and now we have people that have been in professions that were millionaires that used to never be able to make the leap to billionaire. Even they're doing it. Like, is LeBron James worth $1 billion? If he's not, he's close.
I mean,
it seems like it's doable.
He makes his money doing like endorsements and ads.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's how it goes for like athletes. They have their big salary, but but if you're a top athlete, you make the biggest money for doing endorsement ads. I don't know. I mean, Orc knows because Orc loves money so much and he's fascinated by it. Orc would know what his net worth is. But I'm just saying, if he's not worth $1 billion, I think it's achievable that he will be worth $1 billion.
Sure.
And you think, 25, 30 years ago, we knew that athletes made a lot of money, but $1 billion is not achievable. That was outside of what was possible. It's like, well, be happy with your 70 million, but you're not going to be a billionaire. But now it's like, for even again, it's a very small group, the group at the very top, the ones that are in the position to have lots of endorsements, it seems like it will be an achievable goal.
450 million is what it's showing here on Forbes, but I don't know if that includes everything. That may just be his salary, what he's made, or just in salary, he's made 270 million.
Yeah.
So I mean, I can totally see him taking his brand, and easily making $1 billion, because I'm sure Michael Jordan's probably.
I was gonna say Michael Jordan's been retired for a long time, but he's still steadily making a lot of money off his name and stuff. And yeah, and now what's his name? James has come up in an era after that, so he stands to make even more. So yeah,
1.9 billion for Michael Jordan.
Oh, then absolutely.
Yeah.
If he's at it, then that it's just a matter of time. Then probably for
just like speaking engagements, things like that, appearances, or movies. Hell,
yeah. And that's the other thing that's a little different about today's society, right? We talked about this before, but like Instagram people and influencers and stuff, like suddenly just having that is a job, to show up and say something or to tweet something out or put out a photo that you're getting, that's a service that you get paid for. It's crazy. It's ridiculous. I mean, isn't that how, like, we're talking about, like, who's a new billionaire? Weren't they saying, was it Kylie Jenner? She's a new billionaire.
One of the Jenners, yeah, the young one, whatever her name is.
And somebody reported it's like self-made, which is fucking hilarious. Oh yeah, self-made. You just came from a family that already had a ton of wealth, and with all the connections out there, and to be marketed, every advantage to build you up and make you even better. A Rolodex full of all the names and connections you need, but no, it's self-made, sure.
Self-made, but yeah, she inherited who knows how much money from her dad when he died, and then was 12 on that fucking Kardashian show when it first started. So, and was just money on money on money on money, and then when she was able to brand herself. I mean, whatever, more power to her, I mean, but it is what it is. It's sad that people are stupid enough to.
Not self-made, that's for sure.
Exactly.
It's in a tremendous, I mean, could anybody in that position, like, not succeed? Kinda?
But I mean, keep in mind, this is all because Kim Kardashian made a sex tape. Like, that's the only reason why any of those fucking people are a name, a known name, household name.
Yeah, I know. I mean, do they thank her every once in a while? They're like,
they should.
Thanks for sucking that dick on Cam.
Thanks for that fat ass. Thank you so much.
Well, really, the fat ass really does sell it.
But I mean, that's the truth.
Yeah. So there's quite a bit being said in the movie about money that is different from now, but quite a bit that's relatable too. And as we just got discussed about, it's kind of interesting to talk about the parallels and the differences between the political, socio-economic climates, yada yada. But yeah, I'm trying to find out a bit more about Hearst's response to the film.
I saw something that said Hearst had threatened that he had a naked woman that was going to jump into Orson Welles' arms when he walked in his room, and they were going to snap a picture real quick and use it against him in the media.
Wow.
They don't know if it was true because Welles slept somewhere different that night.
Nice. Nowadays, that just makes you more popular.
Sure.
He's a baller.
Mm-hmm. Definitely not a negative thing at all. And not like you're cheating on your wife. That wouldn't affect an election at all these days.
I'd be like, so what?
So
the president got like a blowjob in the Oval Office.
She's hot.
Yeah, exactly. Well done. She's hot. Which is so fucking sad. It's the same thing as like, you find out about like some 13 or 14-year-old that like slept with his teacher. It's like, well, she's hot, so everything's cool. That's not a crime. That's awesome.
That's the double standard
thing
too, yeah.
I'm trying to see here. Something about Hearst. I mean, man, it's funny, like I'll say, a vicious and irresponsible attack on a great man. How Welles led on persons. Couldn't understand what's next. Oh, Luella Parsons. She was a film columnist who worked for one of Hearst's papers. And she was really upset about it. That's funny. See if I can find the thing where Parsons comes in.
It's so crazy to think that it was so easy just to say, well, I'm going to call you a communist.
Yeah.
I'm going to call you a damn communist.
I mean, we still kind of have that going now, though. Like, except now it's like, you're a radical terrorist or something.
You're a racist.
It's like calling Homeland Security on people, right?
Or you're a womanizer, or you're a philanthropist, or you're a rapist.
Yeah.
Though that was probably frowned upon then too, but Harvey Weinstein probably wouldn't have gotten caught though if it was the 20s.
The magazine quoted Welles as saying they couldn't understand why she was so nice, being Parsons. Wait until the woman finds out the pictures about her boss. She denied, saying Welles apologized to Parsons and assured he'd never made the remark. Hearst sent Parsons an angry letter complaining that he had learned Citizen Kane from Hopper, that's a different columnist, not her. The incident made a fool of Parsons and compelled her to start attacking Welles and the film. Parsons demanded a private screening of the film, personally threatened on Hearst's behalf with a lawsuit. Private screening, let's see. She walked out of it. Threatened RKO with a lawsuit if they released the picture. And Hearst bans RKO from papers, because that's true too. Like any of the previews and stuff were not in any of Hearst's papers. Like they wouldn't even like admit like it was coming out.
On what grounds would that be a lawsuit? Defamation?
Yeah. Like, which is pretty funny because it's all like metaphorical stuff, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's funny how sensitive audiences were to that kind of stuff back then. Nowadays, I feel like it's funny because we talk about how there's hypersensitivity and stuff today, and there is, but at the same time, audiences are also stupider and less savvy now in that they're not good at recognizing satire and they're not good at recognizing things like that. Like, for instance, a movie that maybe we'll do, I don't know, and I actually watched it not too long ago, was the French film The Rules of the Game. Now, The Rules of the Game is a film from, I think, the 30s, and basically it's kind of making fun of the rich. And what it is, it's sort of like at a weekend at this rich guy's house, and it's just sort of about like some intertwining plots between these, rich people. And the whole point is it's like during World War II, but nobody even talks about World War II. And it's supposed to sort of make fun of the rich and talk about how insulated they are sort of from the world and how they, how they don't really know what's going on or they don't care or all this stuff. And like, when audiences in Paris first saw that movie, like they flipped out and yelled and screamed. Somebody tried to set fire to the things because they recognized they were being made fun of.
Yeah.
I'm thinking nowadays, if people watch that movie, they would have no idea. They wouldn't think it had anything to do with them. They'd be like, "Oh, this is a movie about stupid rich people, not us." You know.
That's funny.
Oh yeah, that's a good movie. Rules of the Game.
I feel like I may have seen a remake of that. I don't know. I definitely recognize the title.
Well, it's Rules of Engagement is not a remake. If you're thinking of Rules of
Engagement. I understand that's probably a little bit different subject matter.
Yeah. Interesting enough, the Rules of the Game was actually really also noted for being somewhat innovative with some of its camera techniques and stuff like that. Really? Particularly the way it would use action in the background. You'd have like a character coming up the hall in a shot, but you'd have things going on behind it and stuff like that. Like that was sort of a big deal back then. Because again, I think this is the mid-30s. So much stuff again that we just sort of take for granted now in filmmaking, but it all had to start somewhere. Yeah, so let's see, Hearst and advertising, reviewing, or mentioning it on any of his papers. Yeah, he did everything he could to suppress the film, which is pretty funny. And beyond attempting to suppress the film, Will said that, yeah, there's the thing. Oh, she was only 14, too. That thing you said about the girl?
Mm-hmm.
Said not to go back to
wow, yeah.
A 14-year-old girl had reportedly been hidden in his closet with 2 photographers waiting for him to walk in. So they were actually trying to catch him like in a crime, or try to set up a crime.
Yeah, yeah.
Crazy.
So that was the whole thing. Not that it was a young lady, that it was an underage.
Yeah, even in the 40s, that didn't fly.
Yeah. Unless you're
pastor?
What was the piano playing guy?
Oh yeah, that was in the
Jerry Lee Lewis.
Jerry Lee Lewis. Well, what's funny about that is like the audiences in the U.S. didn't care. It wasn't until he went on tour in London and the London press got a hold of it. That's what ruined his career. It was the London press. In the U.S., people didn't really seem to mind. Well, I mean, obviously there were people, but like overall, people didn't seem to mind that much. It was the London press that ruined it, Jerry Lee Lewis.
Wasn't it also his like cousin though? Like his first cousin?
Yeah, like second cousin, I think. But yeah, so,
okay.
But yeah, she was like 13.
Yeah,
and he married her.
That's
too bad because he was a great rock and roller. So there's this record store downtown. It's kind of like the record store. There's a couple locations, but like the main one's called Taz Records. It's an institution of Halifax where you go to get your vinyl and stuff. And the owner was still alive when I first moved here, and I did see him a few times, and he was one of those really into it owners. But he died about 11 years ago. But I did meet him a few times. But like if you go into Taz now, they have like a big, you have a big picture of him and stuff like that, and it has like a quote for him that says, I'm paraphrasing, but it says something like how one of the albums by Jerry Lewis, I don't remember what it's called, but it is like the greatest rock and roll record of all time. Like if you don't believe so, you're just fucking wrong, or something like that. Like he was a huge fan of him, thought he was the best rock and roller. He thought Elvis was shit compared to him and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, that was kind of they were kind of battling for #1 spot at that time, weren't they?
Yeah, they really were. They were the two big icons of rock and roll, or at least the new wave of white rock and roll, right? But
it's not just for the blacks anymore.
We took it over completely, more or less. But yeah, we can take a little break from the movie for now and come back to it. What did we watch? We watched Resident Evil Apocalypse not too long ago for one of our live commentators.
Yeah, and I realized I do own it. I thought I did.
Yeah, you do have the DVD. Pretty sweet.
Yeah, it's. I probably couldn't give that away now if I wanted to.
You definitely wouldn't get any money for it.
No. So I guess I'll keep it.
Someday it'll become a collector's
Yeah.
item.
In the next 20 years, I'll watch it again and have a great time.
Anything's possible. But yeah, we'll probably do another live commentary sometime soon. Try to find something stupid like that.
Yeah. I wanted to do like Van Helsing or something.
I saw that in the theater, man.
Yeah, I did too. It's one I put on my list of.
It's a super fun bad one too, especially for the
Frank.
Remember, it was a big deal. They got some like Shakespearean actor to play the Frankenstein monster. He's so bad. I love it. I want to live. I laughed so hard in the theater when he said that.
It was $140 million, I think. The budget on that.
So crappy.
So unwatchable. I mean, so not entertaining whatsoever. It's and it's completely CG from like start to finish.
Yeah,
which is
flying vampire harpies and a really bad looking Mr. Hyde at the beginning, and
probably why it was so expensive too.
Yeah, I'd love to be able to find that one. That'd be a good one to do.
But yeah, apparently they were gonna do a whole. With the Brandon Fraser Mummy series, they were trying to jumpstart the Universal monsters. They've tried to do it again a few times since, but they did it again with Tom Cruise.
I keep meaning to watch that Tom Cruise Mummy movie. I have access to it, so
let's do that then. I haven't seen that either, but I don't know. I don't want to watch it twice. That's for sure. So, I know you need to. I have access to it as well. I got it. Someone gave me a copy on Vudu.
Nice.
Yeah. But
what was it supposed to be, like the Dark Universe or something? Yeah,
I mean, the only good thing about it is I like the actress that plays the mummy. She was in that crap. Can't think of what she's been in. I know she was in Hotel Artemis, but she's done something bigger than that too.
Well, I forgot all about that movie. That came and went pretty fast.
I liked it for what it was.
Yeah, that's about the one with the special hotel criminals lay low at.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember seeing the preview for that. Couldn't tell you when it came out. Sometime last year, I guess.
Yeah, that was when I was on my kick of seeing things in the theater.
Well, I've just started one, I think, because a few weeks ago, obviously I wanted to see Captain Marvel, Ryan, and I went to saw Captain Marvel, but there were a couple of ones that I've talked about coming out soon that I want to see. The Stephen King Pet Cemetery, the new Pet Cemetery, which is I think April 12th or something like that, and around the same time is also the new Hellboy. I'd like to see both those. And just yesterday, just because I had the opportunity to, I went to see Us, the Jordan Peele's follow-up to Get Out. I did like it, but I didn't think it was like really very good. But I thought it was better than Get Out, because we talked about it before. I don't find Get Out to be original at all. It just feels like the Stepford Wives done over and completely predictable and not really that interesting. I just feel like it got a bunch of attention because, one, Peele was a new filmmaker trying to do something in horror, and two, because it had that racial angle, which I feel like the movie even sort of like contradicts towards the end. But anyway, this movie doesn't have a racial angle, but once again, it focuses on black characters, which obviously I don't have a problem with, and I think it is very true that, like in a lot of genres, blacks have certainly been underrepresented in horror. So it is good to see a movie that, focuses on black characters.
Yeah.
And they all do a pretty good job. But yeah, I like the movie just because, like, not that it's that good or anything, but like if you are a horror fan, at least this is something somewhat original. Like just before we went on air, we were talking about this other one that's coming out like in April that looks like everything we've all seen before. So something la 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 la. I don't know. It just looks like everything else. It looks like Insidious and all those ones.
Conjuring.
The Conjuring, The Woman in Black, it just looks like one more of those ones with weird apparitions appearing and stuff. I'm not saying those movies can't be good anymore. It's just like I'm just really sick of them and they're super predictable and cookie cutter. This, so Us isn't like the most original thing I've ever seen or anything, but it is somewhat original. So I like it for that. And it has a pretty good style to it. Peele does seem to have found a somewhat somewhat unique voice, I guess. And he is clearly a fan of horror and tries to put some horror homages, and none are too hard. What's funny is there's a really weird like quote that is like a Goonies thing, which is really weird. But it had to have been on purpose. There's no way it's a coincidence. It had to have been on purpose. But anyway.
I just saw earlier on Twitter that the new Twilight Zone, hosted by him, is up on CBS All Access. That's their streaming app thing. So
yeah, I'd like to watch it.
Yeah,
I like the old. I was a big fan of the original Twilight Zone.
Yeah,
I've seen almost all those.
I'm definitely game. They've tried to reboot it a few times. I watched it maybe mid 2000s. Then they brought it back again.
Yeah, I knew this wasn't the first time, but it's the original that I really like. I like the original.
But yeah,
iconic episodes.
I just don't understand how CBS thinks they can do a streaming app. I mean, I don't know that they have that much content. It's like $9 a month.
Network that everybody gets. So what extra stuff is this? I mean, everybody already gets CBS if they have a normal cable package.
Yeah, I mean, I'm guessing maybe it doesn't come on that. I mean, I think a lot of the stuff has been only on All Access, like the Star Trek Discovery, I think, was like that. And
it's been on TV.
Has it? Okay.
I've seen it on TV. Yeah.
I'm not sure of how this all works, but like there's a big lots of fans of this Big Brother show, so I think that's one of the big bulls they have.
That's one of the worst shows ever conceived, ever. And I mean, even amongst reality shows, how it's in its like billionth season is beyond me.
People watch
annoying people in a house doing nothing.
And I think it's based on a UK series, and they're still doing it over there too.
Yeah,
probably.
Ryan used to watch it a lot. Like he like at least felt bad about it, but he did watch it.
It's got a fan base.
Yeah,
it's definitely got a fan base.
I don't know. I don't like picking on people for liking stuff that I don't like, but things like that are just I just don't understand it. It's beyond, like, sometimes when, there's something I don't really like, but I can still understand sort of the appeal. I'll be like, okay, yeah I'm not into that, but I kind of get why you like it. Like, this is one where it's inexplicable. Yeah. I'm just baffled. I have no idea what the appeal is. None. Same thing with, like, we went, at the very start of this era of the thing with the Granddaddy Survivor, right? I was interested when Survivor came on because I was like, because I thought it was actually going to be about surviving. You find out very quickly it's not about surviving. And yet so many people say, I just love, like, the strategy and the game within the game. I'm like, what? Like, lying to people and backstabbing?
That's how you win.
Yeah. That's like, we talked about this before. Like, it's another example of, like, how, like, society actually rewards people if they're, like, have sociopathic tendencies. Like, the less you care about others and the more you look out for yourself, the better things will be. Like, that's a terrible lesson, but it's true. It's awful, and yet people are like, "Yeah, I like it," and it's damn entertaining. Well, it's not. I think it's underhanded and bad, and I'm no pure soul or anything. I'm just saying.
Yeah. I mean, I get it. I mean, there's some reality TV that I've watched over the years. It's kind of like it's very addicting type stuff because you want to see how it plays out.
I suppose.
Maybe you're interested in the characters. They've got some unique people that. I got to see how this,
There was an episode of Temptation Island on last night. Remember that one?
It's like The Bachelor or something, right? No,
it's like they take a bunch of couples
and they all
them on an island together and see if they can make them cheat on each other.
Oh, wow. That seems cool, actually. I like that. Tearing marriages apart.
That's an old standby that's been around for a long time. That's why I was surprised. Like I just assumed it got canceled a long time ago. So either it's still on or they brought it back because it was on last night.
I like that concept.
And they're on like a cool island and they make everything super sexy and stuff, right? It's like, now you're gonna go in the hot tub with Melissa. I mean, obviously everybody does cheat or you don't have a show. Nobody gives in to temptation. They're like, nope, I'm totally monogamous and in love with my partner. Not doing anything.
Yeah, it's like you fill out the sheet. You're like, maybe. I don't know.
Like, how desperate. And that's the other thing. Like, the people that... I don't have any sympathy for the people that go on this show because these are all people that just, like, want attention. It's like the number one thing. And they love it. And they feed off it. We give it to them, or whatever. I'm not trying to say I'm so evolved or above it all, but yeah, it's just so not what I'm into.
It's so like I don't know, a reflection of society. Like that's
I know.
like that's what fame is, you know. Oh,
I
you
know.
went on The Bachelor and you got fucked in the ass like on night 3. That's
Yeah.
great. That's so great.
Yeah. See, that's why it's so like easy to get like so superior about society, because you're in a society where everybody wants to know like what the mongrels on like Jersey Shore are up to.
Yeah.
I'm like, they're horrible, disgusting people that don't have a brain cell between them, and yet we validate their existence a billion times over. Like, it's bad enough they're living these lives privately, but at least whatever. But now it's coming into our living room and everything. Oh man.
Hey, those guys are still around because there was an ad on some social media I saw the other day that was like they were telling you like, oh, Dish Network is dropping so and so channel, so you need to go tell them that you want that channel and you want to watch our new show called like I don't know, fist pumping something. I don't know what it was, but
It's like one of the big shows that's up from MTV that gets moved over into Much Music. Because I still flip to Much Music because they would show like Simpsons reruns and stuff. Is like Teen Mom.
Teen Mom, that's a perfect example. There's lots of kids like getting pregnant on purpose because they think it's like a good thing. I don't know. They want to be on Teen Mom, I guess.
It's a career. It's a career path.
Will ruin your fucking life is what it is. Ruin your fucking life.
Yeah. The commercial I saw for it had two different teen moms and they were fighting because that's what people like. Like one was yelling at the other, That
sounds probably common on that show, I would think.
I would imagine. They're like, what's better than one teen mom? Several of them fighting with each other.
I watched a few of those seasons early on just because, I don't know. It was on. I don't know.
Do they talk about the circumstances of how they got pregnant? They'd be like,
I think sometimes.
I met my boyfriend after the dance, and he said he'd love me forever.
Well, like I know one of the original ones.
Pregnant, and now he lives in Timbuktu.
Most of them, they're all like pieces of trash people most of the time.
Right.
But like one of the couples is actually like still together to this day, like, and they have a few kids together and they're married and stuff. But yeah, it's most of them are like in and out of jail, and now they're addicted to so and so, and this other one's like doing porn and
who's raising her kid.
Yeah, the mom, the grandmother.
Yeah.
Grandmother's always raising the kid.
Awful.
Yeah, that's like worst common denominator type stuff. I haven't really watched much lately as far as movies go. I haven't really seen a whole lot.
Yeah, I saw. Well, I mean Us, but before that, I was just sort of rewatching some Batman stuff. I was on a bit of a Batman kick. I rewatched the Nolan trilogy. Then I watched a few of the animated ones I like. Oh, very good. No idea. Seems like Batman and Superman are being benched for a while in the DC universe. I don't know why, considering those are their biggest characters. And I've never understood their weird no Batman policy with their shows. Like, we can't show him. I guess I will watch the new season of Titans whenever the hell that comes out, because I watched the first one. And I think I was so fascinated by how stupid most of the choices were. It's like, why would you do that? But I watched it, so I don't know, because it was on Netflix. I guess tied into that is the Doom Patrol show. There's even an episode of that where they meet the people that are on Doom Patrol. Actually, Brendan Fraser's in that, which seems like a really weird thing. In one part, I guess it's kind of cool that DC is making shows of like really obscure things like Doom Patrol and Legends of Tomorrow and stuff. Like, these are not comics that are like known outside the comic sphere at all, and yet they're somehow getting television shows, which I'm not sure what the pitch is for that, or if they're just saying, oh, okay, there's a lot of creative freedom here because people don't know it. Maybe that's what it is. I don't know. But yeah, it was Batman movies. I didn't even plan to watch the Dark Knight Return ones. They just happened to be on Teletoon, so I watched them again, even though I own them on Blu-ray. I own them separately too, which really pisses me off. I mean, obviously, I should have just waited for them both to come out at the same time, but I didn't, so I bought them each separately. Part one, Dark Knight, Returns Part 1 and Part 2. They're cool though. I mean, they're as true to the comic as can be, and Peter Weller does the voice of Batman, which is pretty cool. He does a pretty good older, aged Bruce Wayne Batman. I'll probably read it again pretty soon because that's kind of how my brain works. Anyway, Jay's on a call, so I'm trying to. Oh no, he's back. You're back.
Oh, sorry about that.
No problem.
Yeah, I was going to ask you what you thought of Mark Hamill doing the voice of the new Chucky.
I think it's great. I think it's a great choice. He's an amazing voice actor.
It will be the Joker doing Chucky.
To a certain extent, yeah, but I'm sure he won't do quite the same accent or anything. Mm-hmm. But I mean, he's pretty good at doing like that deep, malevolent thing. Like about 10 years ago, for like a PS3 game, he did the voice of Wolverine. Now, it's not my favorite Wolverine voice, but it's okay. Mm-hmm. I could see him maybe going in that direction for Chucky. I mean, I'm just really hoping that he doesn't have the same sort of persona he has in the other child. Like, I've never been... I know, actually, you guys just did an episode of The Sausage Factory about the series as a whole, the Child's Play series. Mm-hmm. I think it's a really dumb series. Like, really dumb. And I always felt like its origin never fit anyway, and I feel like the remake makes more sense. I don't like that Chucky is a doll that is inhabited by the spirit of some greasy criminal. That's not scary to me. It's silly. Well, that he was just some guy and he used voodoo magic to transfer his soul. I don't think that's scary. I think it's a lot scarier if the doll is possessed by a demon, or in this case is some sort of AI that comes to life. To me, that is more scary.
Well, that's more realistic.
With Mark Hamill voicing it, well, I don't even care about realism, because let's throw the realism out the door. It's a doll that kills people. I'm not gonna get hooked, hung up on realism too much. I just don't find Charles Lee Ray scary. He's just some, guy who, okay, he's a cop killer or whatever, but it's not scary in a horror movie way. Like, they try to make a real life thing. I don't know. It's dumb. So I'm really hoping that Mark Hamill, in voicing this isn't really up to Mark Hamill in the writing. Chucky will have a really different personality. Like, I don't want a Chucky that, like, makes a bunch of stupid jokes and stuff like he does in the movies, and, I don't know, talks about all the stuff he did when he was human. Like, it's lame to me. So to me, this is a very rare example where I think a remake has a chance to be way better than the original, because it seems like a way better concept.
Well, I mean, yeah, it really went off the rails there with Bride and Seed, but
I've never seen Seed.
I would say watch it. It's a pretty fucking interesting film.
And I never saw the one after Seed either. I've seen 1, 2, Curse. 3, Bride, and whatever the newest one is, Cult.
Yeah. So
Cult was kind of fun. I kind of enjoyed Cult.
Yeah. No, Curse. No, Cult. You're right.
Yeah. Cult. I've never seen Seed or Curse.
Curse is pretty good too. It gets it back on track, being a little more darker, but Seed is very, very bizarre. They have a kid. That from the end of Bride.
Right. Oh, which of course I remember so well. No, but you're right. I know.
That's how it ends. Yeah.
But yeah.
It's it's a straight up comedy. But anyway,
But yeah, so I am interested in the remake simply because I think they're doing a better job with the concept. Now, will it actually be better? I don't know. But I've never been that much of a fan of Child's Play. 1 and 2 I can take. After that, I don't give a shit. 2 has a lot of great elements, but it's still too goofy. Like, 2 has some good kills and has some good sequences that I can appreciate, but it still has, it's hampered by the backstory and stuff that I don't like to begin with.
So is this new film supposed to be darker? I mean, I don't even...
I think so.
I kind of assumed it would be, but...
I get the impression, that it's supposed to be darker and a little more psychological, like a little more focusing on, the kid really thinking like he's crazy or something, I think is some of it.
Yeah.
And I think some of it is like the thing develops sort of a killer personality based on like following the kid. Like like if the kid gets angry, like he takes it, but takes it really far, like or something like that. I don't know. I've read very vague things, but it sounds pretty cool.
It would be cool if they did a remake and it was the kid that was crazy. Like you saw scenes of Chucky doing it, but it was actually him.
Yeah, that could work. It could work. Like the doll's always in the room, but it's actually you find out the kid's the one who's been doing this wrong.
It's like the reverse of the first film. They blame it all on the kid because he's got the shoes and he's always there.
I'd like to watch the first two again. It's been a while. I hate the third one. I can already guess. Let me guess. On the Sausage Factory, there were at least 2 or 3, including Payazel, that super defended the third one. Right? There were people there that said the third one's actually pretty good.
I think we defended it against the next 2 in the series.
Okay, that's fair. Although, to tell you the truth, even though 3 is less stupid than Bride, I still dislike it more. I don't know. I can't really explain that, but I don't know. 3 just really leaves a bad taste in my mouth. Everything about 3 annoys me.
I hadn't seen Bride since the theater, and I'd never seen Seed. I watched Seed and Bride again, and maybe 2 again for that show. But 3 is definitely weak.
I hate its setting. I hate that it's at like this military school. I think that's so stupid.
The only thing I could say is at least they tried to do something different. It wasn't like 2 is basically just a continuation of 1, which it works because it's pretty well done. But I don't know. I get it, and they were making a big point about how could he mail himself? Like Chucky mails himself. What he does in 3? Mm-hmm. That's funny.
Yeah, that's pretty stupid.
And Tyler,
but that's not something I would focus on. Like
Tyler,
I think it's pretty stupid, but it's not why I would criticize the movie because I'm just like, yeah, well, whatever. It's Chucky. He'll do whatever.
The young kid that's there, and for no reason they make up an entire thing. The reason why such a young kid is there, because Chucky's got to go into a kid.
Yeah, that's right. There's a little black kid there who is younger than all the other things. Why is he there? Is he the mascot?
His dad is like a pilot.
Okay.
And he's on a mission or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it says Chucky's gonna be a bro. That was the big line in there.
Oh fuck.
That's something that wouldn't fly these days.
Probably not.
But yeah.
Yeah. So Us was the first horror movie I watched in a while.
And you're gonna see Pet Sematary when that comes out.
Yeah, I mean, I think they spoiled too much of it, and I've seen too much of it. But what I've seen looks good.
Yeah,
I like the original movie too. The original movie's pretty good, and it's one of my favorite of his books.
I used to like it quite a bit. I think maybe recent years with a few new watches, it doesn't quite hold up for me. But
yeah, I get that.
It has some good moments. It's I think it maybe drags a little bit.
I mean, so I know some people are already picking on the remake because they switch. Spoiler, I guess. Although I think everyone knows, like, they switch which one dies and comes back. But I don't think that's a big deal. I think that could be okay.
We don't know that they both don't die. I mean, Gage may die too. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. I'm not getting the sense that he does, but who knows?
I'm fine with that. I mean, just a different adaptation of the same book. So. John Lithgow, always a big fan of him, but I don't know if I'm going to like that performance or not. I'm really attached to.
I mean, that's such a fun.
Oh man, Ed. Not Ed.
Oh, the history on that mountain.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Gale?
You don't want to go down that road.
What's that guy's name?
I don't know. You said it before. But
fuck. I was trying to say Ed Gein. I know that's not it.
Serial killer.
Fuck. Anyway, I'll probably think of it when we're finished.
But yeah, I'm quite interested in it. I mean, I really liked it. I own it. In fact, I'm going to watch it soon. Even though I have the same problems with it that you did. Like, for something that did a much better job of adapting the book than the other one, a few of the changes they made were just bizarre. Mm-hmm. Like, it didn't seem to make any point. Like, why the hell was the bully's dad suddenly a cop? Like, it added nothing. It meant nothing. It's just there.
I don't know why they took. Is it Henry? I don't know why. The one that was the librarian.
Mike.
Mike. He was my favorite character, and
He's my favorite character in the book too.
They like took a lot of his stuff out, and gave it to Ben. Like Ben already has a pretty good sized role, but now you give his stuff to Ben too. I mean,
and they changed the narrative a bit because they have this whole thing that, like, after the brother dies and kicks everything off, like in the book, he just accepts that his brother died and is gone. But in this, they have him actively looking for him. Like, that's why they're that's why they're down in the Barrens. They go instead of playing.
Right.
Like when they meet Ben and Ben gets chased by the bullies and Ben falls down the hill and they meet him, they're just playing. They're building a dam. And even though it has really nothing to do with anything, that's some of my favorite chapters in the book is them working on the dam, because it reminds me of my own childhood, because we have a brook on our street with like a kind of not a big area like the Barrens, a much smaller area, but an area like that. And my friends and I, like Ryan, we used to try to make a dam in the brook too. So I really like that. But in this, like, they're not down there playing. They're down there because the glass has dragged them down to look for the brother. And then the whole thing about how Bev actually gets kidnapped, and that's why they go into the sewer to get her back. That she doesn't get kidnapped in the book. They go down on purpose to confront it. Like, that's the point. And also they get halfway chased in by Henry and the other bullies. But this, they make it a rescue mission and turn her into a damsel in distress, which I didn't think was right. But anyway, I'm going to watch that again because I still like most of it. I think it's really good. Better than I could have hoped for, really.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not that interested in the second part. Like, since they decide to split it up that way by having the kid stuff and the adult stuff, like, it's made me lose interest in the adult stuff because the kid stuff, I mean, I'll watch it, but,
It's going to be weird because the kids are coming back. So it's going to be, I mean, at least it'll be more like the book in that, aspect that it'll be.
The second part's going to have more flashbacks?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The kids are coming back.
Well, what else is there left for them to do?
Don't know.
I don't understand that. So that's another thing that makes me wary. It sounds like they're going to add a whole bunch of stuff in.
I don't know. And the cast.
I do actually own that on Blu-ray, and I'm going to watch that again soon too.
It's like name like the top 5 actors, and they're all in the film. It's like, I don't know why they have to do that. It's like Bev is like Amy Adams or some shit,
Yeah.
It's not that, but it's might as well be.
If it is, that's interesting because you know what? The girl that played Bev is the same girl that played the young version of Amy Adams in Sharp Objects.
And she did a good job in that show.
That would be like twice. I liked the show until the resolution. I thought the resolution was terrible.
Mm-hmm.
I was really upset with that. Did not like how it ended at all.
The whole, you mean the final resolution?
Yeah.
Really?
And the whole final episode pisses me off. Like, her actions are stupid, and the actual reveal is worse. But anyway.
Look at what is it?
So I am a little bit. I'm in somewhat back up more of a horror mood after taking, most of the winter off. I kind of overdosed on horror around Halloween, and then I just mostly didn't touch it throughout most of the winter.
You know who it is?
I'm back around to it.
Jessica Chastain.
Oh, I do love her.
Mm-hmm. It's so typical, though. It's like
I mean, I know what you mean.
James McAvoy, Bill Hader, Bill Skarsgård, of course, is coming back.
Bill Hader?
Yeah, Bill Hader. He's playing Richie, which I think he may be a good Richie.
I guess. I mean, I really like Bill Hader. I'm actually a big fan of him, but okay, that's a kind of a different angle for Richie. I mean, I get it. Okay.
And I don't recognize these other kids. Or other people.
Yeah. I started watching that show that he's on, but I stopped. I should watch the one where he's the hitman that takes the acting class.
Oh, yeah. Barry. That's not bad.
It's not bad. I might get back into it. I really do like Bill Hader. I thought he was like the lone bright light in SNL the last bunch of years that he was on. Like,
he's not a bad dramatic actor either. He's done.
Was always solid. I don't think I've seen him do dramatic stuff before. I think Barry's the most dramatic thing I've seen him do, and it's somewhat comedy.
The Skeleton Twins is a pretty good film with him.
I heard of that. I really don't like her though. Kristen Wiig.
She's okay in that.
And everybody loved Kristen Wiig at that era. Like she was considered like one of the best things about SNL in that era, and I could not stand her. Never liked her. Never liked any of her characters or any of her things, and that's kind of the main reason why I knew I wasn't going to like the Ghostbusters. It wasn't necessarily because it was women; it's because she was one of them, and I don't like her.
No, it's Melissa McCarthy's the one I don't like. But no, I liked Kristen Wiig. I think up until she did like Bridesmaids.
I've heard that's awful.
When she just, giant star at that point and is in everything. But no, Skeleton Twins is a good film. You may like.
What's funny is I remember once, like on a few years ago, we were on the Sausage Factory talking about, and she got brought up, and I think I was talking then about how annoying she was. And I think John Avenger, one of our viewers, said like she has like the sexiest voice he's ever heard, and I'm thinking, what?
Really?
What? I think it was John Avenger. If you're watching, I can't believe that, John. I can't stand her voice.
Huh.
I mean, the only worst voice I can think of is like Kristen Schaal. Imagine your girlfriend had that voice.
Man.
Couldn't do that. Could not do it. She could look like fucking Kate Upton, but she has that voice. I couldn't do it. I'm very much about auditory. Sound means a lot to me. My memory is better with sound. Like I'm so bad at recognizing actors, but I often will recognize them through their voices more than their faces.
What if she was like Fran Drescher on The Nanny?
That's not much better, but it's a little better. It's a little better for me, honestly, even though it's still pretty terrible.
Yeah, that's not her real voice, but Kristen Schaal, I think that is her.
That is her voice.
She's just doing her normal speaking voice on
these cartoons. And I don't find it annoying, actually. I'm just saying it would be super unsexy, is what I'm saying. I don't mean it's annoying and she should, you're terrible, go kill yourself. I just mean, like, I could not imagine being in, like, a romantic situation with a girl that had a voice like that. I couldn't imagine her saying any sort of, like, come on to me in that voice.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I'm fine with Kristen Schaal. I liked her before, like, she showed up and stuff, because I really liked that show, Flight of the Conchords.
Okay.
I wish they did more than 2 seasons. I love that show. And I love those guys. They just did a special not too long ago.
Really?
Where they do a concert in London. Yeah. It's pretty nice. It's funny, they reference the show. They say, you might have noticed that we've gotten older. But to be fair, you've gotten older too.
I know her primarily from Bob's Burgers, I think.
I can't stand the look of that show. I know the show, though. I mean, it's funny. I should be all over it because I love John H. Benjamin so much, but I can't do it.
Do you remember when The Far Side was like a comic strip?
Oh, yeah. It's one of the best comic strips of all time.
Do you remember when it left, when Gary Larson's like, I'm going to stop doing this and retire or whatever? Well, like in our papers, I mean, I guess this was like a national thing. Like they had a vote of who was going to replace The Far Side in that portion of the strip. And there was a few different, ones to choose from. Some have gone to, be a thing on their own afterwards, but it was Close to Home is the one that won. I think it may be the one I voted for. But Close to Home is the exact same animation as Bob's Burgers. I don't know what the,
connection is it?
Yeah. I don't know what the connection is. It's got to be the same artist or whatever. But
I'll have to look it up because I don't know it. I've really lost track of newspaper stuff.
I mean, this was still like in the 90s probably.
Yeah.
Like back when newspapers existed.
Man, I love The Far Side. That's one of the most brilliant cartoons ever.
Oh yeah, I've got books and books
with a single panel. So actually, the last time I was at Costco, I don't know, a couple months ago, and they have sometimes they have big collections, and I already own it, but they have the complete Calvin and Hobbes, which I own, which is already on top of owning all the separate books anyway. But they also had a complete Far Side. So there's this couple that look around my age, maybe early 30s, next to me. And the woman says to the man, this guy with glasses, and she's just like, "Oh, Far Side. You ever read that?" And he looks at it and he goes, "What is that?" And she's like, the Far Side's like, a comic strip. And he's like, I don't know. And I like wanted to punch him in the head. It's like, how don't you know what the hell the Far Side is, dude?
Really, that's
yeah. I don't own the book anymore. I think my sister owned it, but it was a really great book. One of the books in it, it had like some of his commentary and stuff in it.
Oh, really? That would be cool.
Oh, it's a really good one, and there's a really good one too where he does. And in the intro, he has like these fake drawings that he said he drew when he was a kid to like depict his childhood, and they're like these crudely drawn things with crayons. So like, here's one when I was a kid, when I was 7, and it's a picture of him up, and it's a picture of the house from the outside. It's like, I'm up in my room, and he's got like bars on the windows like that. So he has like several drawings that like depict that he had like a horribly abusive childhood or something like I think like his parents are making him eat out of a dog dish or something like that. It's really funny, but also later in it he has commentary for one, and there's this really great one. So you remember? I know there's a million to remember, but there's this one again. It's a single panel one where it's like a city view. It's a view of like a city street with buildings, and there's this huge crowd running towards the camera, and above them is a UFO with 2 aliens in it. And one of the aliens is exclaiming "Yeehaw!" like that, right?
Yeah.
So that's the joke. And he was talking about how sometimes things get messed up, and sometimes there's typos that really mess up the joke. And he showed how like one of these, like how that one ran in one of these papers, and instead of saying "Yeehaw," it just said "Yee." Which just makes it really baffling because it's like, is the alien yelling that? Are the humans yelling it? What is ye? Is it just that they're scared? There are a few of those where like there's just a small thing and it completely changes it.
How did it get changed to that to begin with? It was just
it was a
too
typo.
small.
Yeah, I don't know. Some sort of typo that happened, but it's just ye. So, which makes it funnier in a way, but also baffling.
Yeah, I remember the yeehaw one though.
Yeah, I remember the one we had in our fridge for a long time was that School for the Gifted. It was the kid pushing on the door that said "pull."
Classic. Yeah, man, that was one of the things like that I wanted every year was the day calendar. Where you tore off the days.
Yeah. So yeah, that Calvin and Hobbes are the 2 greatest newspaper strips of all time.
I was a big fan of the comic strips, man. That was a big thing. Like my dad would read them to me every night, before I could read.
Yeah,
I remember all of them.
Yeah, it was a big deal. On the weekend, we get the weekend edition of the paper that had the bigger section, and I would, spread them out on the floor and look at them on the Saturday.
Would they be color on the weekend or color on?
Yeah, those were the special colored ones.
Yeah, it's the same for us. I actually had quite a few of those. I just recently threw them all away because what the hell am I going to do with that?
What's funny is I'm a Canadian, but I could not stand For Better or For Worse. Because For Better or For Worse was like so real and slice of life that it barely even tried to be funny. It was just like, here's the mundanity of everyday life.
Very rarely was it funny, but yeah, I did follow it though.
Most people just liked it because it was so real and because it unlike other comics, it aged in real time.
Yeah.
And they had I remember they even made a whole special of when their dog Farley died, the death of the dog. I'm like, I can't read this. I don't want to read this in a comic strip and be reminded of my own dog dying, for Christ's sake.
Because you've read about Farley for the last 20 years.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I always read it, but I was not a fan of it. I was just like, I don't, because people are like, it's so real. I'm like, why do I care like that? Because it would just be some boring slice of life thing.
I'll tell you one I hated was Kathy.
Yeah.
And it was also
it's back then Kathy was seen as sort of a feminist thing. Nowadays it's probably seen as anti-feminist. Because Kathy's flipping out all the time. She's trying to make herself look better. She's eating ice cream when she's upset.
Right.
That's not feminism. That's completely backwards. It's it's true. Yeah. Kathy, who would say ack. Yeah, she was always trying to lose weight to go on dates and stuff. And the one that baffled me, of course, as a kid, is the one that baffled all kids, which was Doonesbury, which was so adult and political. Remember the super adult political one that started in the 70s?
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
I would always read it, and I would have no idea what anything meant, because they did have all these, references to American politics that I did not know.
Most of the time, yeah. That's the way it was. And there was Mallard Fillmore.
I know the title. I can't. It's a duck.
That was another one that was very political.
The last few years that I actually bothered with it, there was a lot of filler crap. There was a really terrible like caveman one that was no funny. Might have been like 1 million BC or something. It was no funny.
BC used to be one.
It was called BC, yeah.
Yeah, that was one we always had. It wasn't funny. It was
Some of the
Hagar.
classics, Hagar the Horrible,
Yeah.
Marmaduke, like Family Circus, not funny.
I
thought the mom from Family Circus was kind of hot though. I was kind of into her.
Family Circus. That's the one I was trying to think of.
Yeah.
Like Arlo and Janice.
Don't know that. I don't think. I probably do.
It was just a husband and a wife and a cat. Crankshaft.
Yeah, I remember that. Wizard of Id.
Wizard of Id. Yeah.
That's. There was one in like the later '90s, early 2000s that I thought was kind of cool that my mom always showed me because she thought it was like me because it was called Zits and it was about like a teenage boy.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't it wasn't great, but it wasn't bad either.
That was really after I was reading it on the regular, but yeah, I remember. Let's see, like Dagwood.
Oh my god.
Like Snuffy Smith. I don't know if you guys had that one about the rednecks.
No, I don't know that.
Or not the hillbillies, I think would be the better term.
I don't know it. Might have not. There's just so many, I can't remember them all. Charlie Brown would always run.
Yeah.
What's funny is I was never really into Charlie Brown as a comic. I just really like its TV specials. I mean, the comic's fine.
I would read it, but I was never really that into it either.
It was already pretty dated by the time we came along. You know, it was a pretty tired shtick.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't new, I don't think. I mean, it wasn't. Yeah.
Yeah, as much as I respect Charles Schultz and stuff, like I've had multiple opportunities to like buy the complete Peanuts, and I'm like, I don't need that. You know, I own some of the holiday specials on DVD though. I like them.
I'm not that big of a fan. Like Calvin and Hobbes, though.
Yeah, to me, that's the greatest. There's nothing better.
I had all of
it's such a perfect example of like an artist doing something right. He did 10 years of brilliant work and then walked away. I mean, how perfect is that? And also, he could have gone the Garfield route, and I'm not criticizing Jim Davis one bit for this.
That's another good one.
Because I do love Garfield, and I like Jim Davis. But Garfield is any product you can think of is Garfield. He sold out to everything. There is no such thing as Calvin and Hobbes merch. He wouldn't allow it. Not anything. And you gotta respect that, because he could have made a lot of money.
But there's stickers of him peeing on things all over the place.
Yeah, but that's unauthorized.
I know.
I mean, you can't get a Calvin and Hobbes shirt. You can't even get a stuffed Hobbes. And some people said, you know, like, I don't see the harm in getting a stuffed Hobbes. But I guess he just thought it's a slippery slope. If I let one thing in, I'll let them all in. So
I wouldn't call that selling out. I mean, you're a fan. You'd probably buy a stuffed Hobbes, right? I mean,
yeah, I would. Well, that's what I mean. If they kept it to like maybe a T-shirt or a stuffed Hobbes, I think that's good. But I guess maybe he thinks, you know, not before long, it's everything, because you know there's literally everything Garfield. What's funny is just the other day it popped up an MSN, a story from France. It was from like their National Geographic thing or something like that. I mean, luckily I can understand French because it was a video, and it was about this mystery of like this part of this coast, this beach somewhere in France, where for 30 years. Pieces of a telephone, a Garfield telephone, have been washing up on this beach, and they couldn't find out why until finally, like, this environmental group came and they met this guy that lived somewhere in the area, and he said, like, back in 1980, he and his brother went exploring along the coast, and they went into this cave that's only accessible when the tide is low, and in the cave there was a cargo container that had a whole bunch of the Garfield phones in it. When they found it again, it was pretty much empty, but that's where they'd come from for over 30 years. All these Garfield phones kept washing up and breaking into pieces and stuff. But it's funny, I guess in that part of France, like an image of the Garfield phone is like become like part of their marketing. It's like for like environmentalism. It's pretty cool.
Wow.
But yeah, I love Garfield, but it did go on too long. You know, it went on way too long. And it also, you know, did sell out completely.
About
anything you can name, there's a Garfield.
Yeah,
there's Garfield.
I agree with that. So
underwear and clocks and
basically, what's the guy's name that did Calvin and Hobbes?
Hold on, Watterson, Bill Watterson.
So basically, he was like, I don't want that to be my thing. I don't want to wind up like that. I mean, I guess so. I can understand that, but I mean, also you've got a lot of fans of your work. I don't know.
I just really respect it. He did 10 years, walked away, and now he just lives quietly and does watercolors. He obviously has some money, but he could have made way more money.
Yeah, that obviously wasn't the thing. Wasn't about the
The
money.
one that people always point to that, they say, if you like that, you like Bloom County. That was never in my papers. Bloom County is
I
always brought up as an example of one of the really great ones that's up there with Calvin and Hobbes. That was never in any of my papers. I mean, I've read it online, and it's not bad, but I never had access to it growing up.
yeah, I've definitely read that.
Just like I never had access to Pogo, and Pogo is kind of like the granddaddy of them all. That's Walt Kelly. And that started back in like the fucking like 40s or 50s or something, Pogo, which was like a funny animal comic about animals living in this swamp called like the Okie Dokie Swamp or something like that. And it was, it was very subversive and very clever, and it had political overtones and stuff. Again, I had to discover it later because it was never in any paper I read. But it ran from like the 40s to the 70s. But Walt Kelly, he's a big deal. He's like in the comic book Hall of Fame, right up there with like Will Eisner.
I'm not familiar with Pogo. I don't believe.
Well, you can find it online. It's pretty good. It's just about like these anthropomorphic like animals that live in this swamp, and it's just about the. I think Pogo's like supposed to be a hedgehog or something like that. They just do stuff, but it's it's clever. It has its clever things, and often he'll like some soapbox moments. He'll make like some statements on it. It's pretty good, but again, it's considered like one of the big ones, like that influenced so many people. Obviously, the closest thing I know that was influenced by it is Jeff Smith's comic Bone, which is a really great comic. One of the great indie comics. Remember Bone? Yeah.
I remember what it looked like.
Yeah. I have it in the big 3 hardcover Scholastic editions. But anyway, Bone is obviously very heavily influenced by
Jeff
Pogo.
Smith, you said?
Yeah, Jeff Smith.
It says Bloom County stopped in '89. I believe that may be why I don't remember it too well.
Yeah, but I mean, there's lots of. I mean, I guess, but I mean, there's lots of really old ones that were obviously. Because I mean, how old was like Blondie and Dagwood? And I was reading it. I don't think the guy was still making them in the '90s.
Really? Okay. So I was thinking some of those that they were still going. Like Jim Davis was still making.
Yeah,
Garfield,
he was.
right?
Jim Davis. Like I said, I don't even know when has Garfield ended yet. I don't even know if Garfield ended. It's been going from 1978.
Garfield's in a Twitter war with Normal now. Normal.
Yeah.
They got to keep it current.
That's funny.
He's Garfield's trying to find all the dank memes on the internet.
Probably the weirdest Twitter feud has just happened. Jim Carrey and Mussolini's granddaughter. Did you hear about this?
No.
Okay, so you know how Jim Carrey, mostly all his tweets now are just like bizarre paintings he does, mostly to like make fun of Trump and stuff. Well, he did like a painting of like rendering Mussolini's death. If you don't remember how Mussolini died, it was pretty bad because he actually got taken down by the people he oppressed for so long. Basically, they took him to like the city square, and they hung him and his mistress, and they like hung them upside down or something and killed them.
Oh wow! Yeah.
So he painted that and said something like a reminder, like this is how dictators end up or something like that. Suddenly, on his Twitter feed, Mussolini's still living granddaughter said, "You're a bastard." And I'm thinking.
I mean, you can't really defend Mussolini, though, buddy. I mean, come on.
Yeah, that's what I'm gonna say. I'm like, I get that you could say maybe it's not in great taste, but your grandfather is one of the 20th century's biggest villains, a mass murderer, that oppressed his people and did so much harm to so many lives. And and what's funny too is then she started posting all this stuff in his feed about nukes, like the nukes being dropped in Japan and Native Americans being oppressed. I'm thinking Jim Carrey's not American, but okay, I guess you're showing him.
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, who thought we would live to see this happen? The Twitter feud. Jim Carrey, comedian, The Mask, Ace Ventura, and Mussolini's fucking granddaughter.
She looks like the lead singer of Aerosmith, Steven Tyler.
I didn't see what she looked like. But that's
she looks rough. Like she's had some work done.
I didn't even know he had any living relatives until she showed up.
What? Yeah. Oh, Genghis Khan wasn't that bad. Come on.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, he had some good qualities. Oh man, that's good stuff.
I mean, way to rep the family name.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ, some things just aren't worth it.
Yeah, it's I don't know.
I mean, if you're like related to Hitler, I don't judge you if you changed your
Yeah,
name. You know.
it's like John Hitler. Hey, don't talk about my dad or my great grandfather. Yeah, I would imagine they all changed their names if there are any that survived.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure there are plenty that don't know that they're related to Hitler.
Well, probably. Apparently, we're all related to Genghis Khan.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
I saw Patton Oswalt was doing a special, and he said, yeah, he'd done one of those things, and he says, like, I found a part that said Mongolia. So I asked the guy, and he's like, oh yeah, that's Genghis Khan. Like Genghis Khan, when he was like going around conquering people, he also like fucked everybody.
He just fucked everything.
Like for hundreds and hundreds of miles around, he would like so people all over like the continent would have a relation to him. I can believe it. I mean, if you're like the ruler of the biggest empire on earth, you might as well get it on.
I'm sure a lot of people are related to Benjamin Franklin too.
I'm somewhat distantly related to Nixon.
Really? Wow.
Because many years ago, before like all this ancestry kit stuff and came out, like one of my uncles, one of my mother's brothers, he was really into this kind of stuff, and he did a bunch of research on our family, and that's one of the things he turned up. I also have an ancestor who was literally burned as a witch.
Wow. In Salem?
No, over in Europe.
Oh wow, the original.
So yeah, like a long time ago. So like 600 years ago or something.
Wow. That's cool. I don't know of any like exact people that I'm related to, but my sister is one of the descendants of the president of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis.
Jefferson Davis.
So there's that.
It's something.
Yeah.
Some people say it's better than Nixon.
Oh,
man,
well, which one's worse?
Yeah.
But she's my half sister, so
yeah, I remember.
Not on my side. I'm related to Yanni. I do know that.
Oh shit.
Yeah, I don't know how, but so I've been told. I don't think somebody would make that up.
It'd be pretty random. But anyway, we can swing around back to Citizen Kane to finish up.
Can we after that? After that epic discussion?
What else can we do? But so yeah, trying to think. So we're gonna do one more Wells after this, and it's gonna be kind of an outlier because it's a movie he didn't live to finish, that got finished for him, and that is the other side of the wind, which is popped up on Netflix, which is really what kind of started all this whole thing for me, because that and the also documentary They'll Love Me When I'm Dead came up at the same time and really put the idea in my head. Seemed like a good idea to do some Wells. But yeah, this is his first movie, and it's kind of haunted him for the rest of his life because he could never top it or equal it, I guess. But I think it's kind of unfair to say that everything afterwards was a disappointment.
Mm.
And I mean, to just burst onto the scene like this, a 25-year-old and a writer, director, producer, actor of such talent, and his body of work is really very interesting and impressive. And it's too bad he didn't get to finish more things, as we talked about in other shows, because of, right after this movie, he did The Magnificent Ambersons, and it came back to earth for that one because that movie was full of executive meddling and stuff that really upset him. And then that's why when he did, a couple of years later, he did The Stranger, he used a lot of long takes, basically because he was worried about where they'd be doing cuts. So he thought the more long takes he did, the harder it would be for them to cut things. And then right after that, he basically left Hollywood for the next couple decades and spent his career trying to make films over in Europe. And he had to have some good results over there, although, again, kind of mixed. And it was difficult getting stuff done. Sometimes he'd be working on a film for 3 or 4 years before he'd actually get it done, on and off. Most notably some things like his version of Othello and stuff like that. But I really, maybe we'll not part of this series, but maybe in the future we'll do The Trial, because I really like The Trial. I think it's one of my favorite books, and I think they do a really good job of adapting. And I said the irony being that it's actually an unfinished book. Kafka died before he finished it. But Wells, I thought, was the perfect person to do that to do that movie. And Anthony Perkins might be the perfect person to. I think the movie came out in '62, still black and white, so oppressive, so great. So maybe that's something we'll do in the future, but not part of this series. But yeah, Wells himself is just such an interesting figure. To just burst onto the scene the way he did with this film. You know, he's an avant-garde theater guy. He's a radio innovator, and now he's a film maverick, cinema darling. What do you want to call it? He wore many hats throughout his life. Insufferable genius, I guess you could call it. But you know, he definitely ranks up there with the greats like Bergman, Hitchcock. I don't know, Ozu maybe. But
Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing. I mean, watching this film is like, damn, that's a great film. Knowing that he was 25 when he, directed, wrote, and starred in it is,
and didn't really know anything about filmmaking. And as he said, like part of it, like his own ignorance of the medium helped him achieve things that hadn't been done before, just because he didn't know he couldn't do them. So he thought he'd try, which is pretty cool. But I lost my spot. It was something about Citizen Kane. But I mean, yeah, just such ambition.
Mm-hmm.
Such an ambitious thing to pull off, and then pull it off so well. And yet, throughout his career, like he didn't have financial successes. Like the only film that really did well was The Stranger, and then after that, it was just about breaking even, more or less, so he could move on to his next project. And yet, he was so respected and admired, and as we said, there were so many people that he made friends with and did things with, including a part of the next generation, Peter Bogdanovich, who features a lot in more contemporary stuff about Wells, including They'll Love Me When I'm Dead, and there's another one too. I think that Bogdanovich might have even directed himself. That's all about Wells's life, and just it seemed like the more I saw him in like documentaries and stuff, the more I thought this is a guy that really did love life and have a lot of enthusiasm for stuff, and always seemed to take his criticisms in stride. Like he never let it get him down or anything. Or get discouraged, which I think is pretty admirable too, because it's not like he didn't have setbacks and he didn't have critics. He had plenty.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, he just seemed to always, yeah. What was the joke? He would say, yeah, that he started at the top and he would work his way to the bottom, which kind of did happen when you think about, especially the '70s, where he's doing like commercials and stuff. But
that's kind of what happened to Citizen Kane too.
Mm-hmm. In a way, it kind of foreshadows maybe the direction of his life a bit. Although I don't think he was nearly as arrogant as the character of Kane.
Sure.
But still. But, he spent most of his life in a rather itinerant manner, always planning productions and writing scripts, doing lots of stuff at once. A lot of stuff never getting made or finished, some of it never even going beyond the concept. He was always trying to do stuff. And he was a major public figure, so that is true too of the Kane comparison. He was very much a public figure. In fact, throughout like the '60s and '70s, even people that didn't necessarily watch his movies, they knew who he was. Like he was a personality. He was Orson Welles. Even though he was usually over in Europe stirring stuff up. Again, he sort of had two kind of different views or identities based on where he was. Throughout like the '60s and '70s. In the U.S., he was kind of seen as the guy that had done Citizen Kane, and then afterwards. Whereas in Europe, he was very much admired and thought of as still quite a brilliant filmmaker, if somewhat hampered and troubled. But and he's just such a big character himself. That's why he became, which is another reason why people remembered him and become such a indelible part of pop culture, and why lots of people would like to do parodies of him and impressions of him, because he just had this larger than life personality and presence that was just very striking and memorable. But getting back to Kane itself, I mean, it's hard to overstate what an incredible achievement it was, and again, it is sometimes hard to appreciate that today, so many decades later. You really have to take into account exactly what the scene was sort of when he showed up, only being 25, a theater maverick, and and getting this crazy, unprecedented contract and just pulling off just a really, really well told movie.
Mm-hmm.
Very arresting movie.
Mm-hmm.
It's also a good movie to show to people that like discount movies made from that era as boring, because there's quite a few that like just show that they're just so well made that they're just really arresting. I feel the same way about Casablanca, which I think it came out the year after. Like Casablanca is basically people having conversations in a nightclub, but you watch it and you're just enthralled because the performances are so good and the writing is so good. And I feel a lot the same like with this movie. In that in some ways, as we said, okay, it's sort of the rise and fall of this rich, eccentric guy that becomes really powerful and influential. And it doesn't seem necessarily unique or super interesting, but it's all there in the execution. I really feel it's just such a tight narrative and such a great use of these narrative techniques. A really great use of montage to collapse time and space to get things across, in a quick, efficient manner, but without seeming like you're just blowing through it. And then the scenes that are longer, like they know to make them longer. They know where to like linger and where to flesh things out. It's a character study about him, but there's other characters that pop up and they all sort of have at least one memorable moment, something about them that sort of stands out a little bit, which I think is a very balanced and hard to do in kind of any movie, regardless of the story you're telling. That's kind of hard to do. It's hard to like make all the characters seem, they don't always have to seem equally important, but at least equally interesting, so that the audience isn't like, well, I don't care about this scene or what happens here. It's a movie that makes its way without having any lulls and getting everything across very efficiently, which has to be respected. And again, just sort of the climate he made it in, making a somewhat very defiantly making a somewhat controversial movie with a powerful person like Hearst dogging his heels all the way and doing what he can to stir up bad publicity for it and bury it. And having some somewhat bold political themes being reflected in here, and I think it does say some things kind of about like the American identity at the time. America being kind of this unique sort of country that was developing into a superpower, that was sort of finding its way by at sometimes almost being like an isolationist, in other times going out of its way to be involved in other world affairs and stuff. And you kind of see that Kane's character sort of does the same thing. He'll hold himself aloof, but at other times he wants to really get out there and be a man of the people, et cetera, and really be a part of I don't know, public life. It's interesting to note the film came out just a few months before the attack on Pearl Harbor, so at this point the U.S. was not in the war.
Oh wow, I didn't realize that.
A lot of people were concerned that they were going to get into the war. It's funny, both World War I and World War II, the prevailing sentiment at the time was from the American public was they did not want to get in the war. They didn't want to get into either, and they were outright upset when the government decided to get into World War I. World War II, since there was actually a direct attack on American soil, that was different. But
yeah, it's not necessarily there's a lot more to it than just that. But
yeah, so again, they talk a little bit about the idea of isolationism. But yeah, just some very bold choices, and the episodic nature of some of it is well done too.
It falling right there with Pearl Harbor, that probably affected the success of it too.
You think?
Well, I mean, people going to go clamor to the theaters when the country's at war?
I suppose that's true. Yeah, I mean, the war years were fairly lean on entertainment stuff. People, tried to tighten their belts and stuff and pitch in to the war effort rather than spend stuff on excess. And of course, it affected all walks of life. In the film industry, you had some of the prominent directors who actually went over and fought in World War II. You had, and that's again we talked about when you talked about the Disney animated canon. That's why for the war years they didn't do full feature length films. Instead, they would do those package movies instead, like Three Caballeros and stuff like that, or the one that has what is it? The two ones. Legend of Sleepy Hollow and The Wind of the Willows. You know, instead of because they were easier to do because a lot of their talent wasn't there.
Right.
Same thing with major sports leagues. Obviously, the one I know is the NHL. There was kind of a dearth of talent in the NHL for several years because some of the best players were fighting in World War II.
Wow.
Which led to some bizarre things, including I think the youngest player ever to play in the NHL was 16, which you can't do now. But there was a 16-year-old who once suited up for the Boston Bruins because they just didn't have any players. So yeah, obviously the war was all encompassing, all aspects of life. So I guess that's true too when you think about like performance of box office, like how well were movies doing when like a country is fully engaged in a world war. So yeah, that is a good point.
I mean, maybe after a few years of the war, people needed, an escape. But I mean, I don't know. I'm just speculating. I know that's the way. Like after 9/11, I think a lot of people they wanted to, escape reality a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, I think so.
And I think that's why a lot of things were popular when they wouldn't have been otherwise.
Yeah, things always run that trend. Mm-hmm. Just like when I talk about comics and stuff, like that's one of the reasons why superheroes, what has really started off so strongly, almost died out completely in the 50s, was because I think World War II had such a sobering effect on the public that the idea of like superheroes that could just come in and save the day, it just, it didn't wash well with them at the time because they'd just been through something so catastrophic and horrific that maybe they just wanted something that, I don't know, didn't make it seem like it could all be fixed.
Because when was Captain America? Was that after World War I?
It was during. I mean, that was one of the cool. Okay. That was one of the cool things about Jack Kirby and Joe Simon doing that, because the actual first issue of Captain America came out in 1941 before the U.S. entered the war. They actually timed it really well.
Wow.
So I mean, that was an instance of them really capitalizing, because within a few months the U.S. was in the war, and it seemed like a really patriotic and great thing to do to buy the Captain America comics, because you have like Captain America fighting against the Nazis and all this stuff, and later the Japanese as well. But yeah, by the time the war was over in the later 40s and into the 50s, superhero comics were at an all-time low, and a lot of ones just died out for a while completely, and almost didn't make it. Only the big ones really lasted, and that's like Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman. The rest disappeared, and then might be restarted, because that's one of the things that at the very start of the Silver Age that DC did, was they reimagined few of their Golden Age characters differently. There was a Golden Age Green Lantern, but then at the end of the 50s, they made the new Green Lantern. The original Green Lantern was Alan Scott, and his lantern was magic. But what they did with him was they made the new Green Lantern, Hal Jordan, and his lantern was the one everybody knows. It was a piece of an alien thing, and it's all about alien technology. It was really sci-fi, because sci-fi was becoming a big thing in the 50s. And they did a similar thing with the Flash. The original Golden Age Flash was a guy named Jay Garrick, and he had like a weird silver helmet. But what's often considered the very first ever Silver Age comic was a Flash comic in 1956 called Flash of Two Worlds, where Jay Garrick's character meets the new Flash, Barry Allen, the more modern looking one. Mm-hmm. So they did that. So they did that with a couple different characters. But yeah, there's all sorts of aspects of this that we could get into, but we won't because it's a little more minutia. But because I mean, this was revolutionary in a lot of ways and got a lot of nominations at the Oscars and stuff for things like sound editing and the score and the editing and the cinematography, all that stuff.
Definitely should have won for cinematography.
I know. I was thinking about some of the great moments of that. I mean, I know I talk about too much with black and white movies, but I mean, the fact is, black and white movies, since they don't have color, really have to rely on light and shadow. And there's that great scene when she's giving the opera performance, and they show him in the audience, and he's all in shadow, except there's like a beam of light across his eyes. So you just see his eyes, and it's great. His eyes are so intense, and it really highlights sort of his intensity and his isolation from the rest of the audience in the way he's focusing on her. So there's just so many great touches like that throughout the film that look really great and are really effective, again, as a narrative device. And that's, once again, why the film has such a sterling reputation, because it does just so many things so well, all at once sometimes. And there's so much thought put into everything. I really like a lot of the set designs, particularly, like I said, the one I liked the most was that archives place, because it was so big and impressive. But there's some other interesting places too. Some obviously great set design to show us Xanadu itself, its opulence and its gothic nature. There must have been some background sets that were painted pretty well that, kind of get lost in black and white, but if you can focus on them, you can see that there's some good painting going on, which is something they really relied on in earlier movies, right? Because you didn't have green screens and great effects. So a lot of early movies had to rely on background paintings. And it was even more difficult, of course, to pull off in color. Plus, the movie was interesting, too, like for its editing, how some of the cuts would be quite jarring and fast. Sometimes you'd have a really nice sort of visual contrast be pulled off that way. I can't think of one exactly, but I know it does it a few times, where it'll just sort of very quickly cut from one image to another, and it's kind of a striking contrast is made.
One of my favorite ones of those was, I forget who it was, but it was after, all of the bad reviews and stuff, and he was yelling, "Can't do this to me," and this, that, and the other, and then the door shuts, and then you immediately hear like a horn.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember that? I can't remember who he was talking to, but I know that he was yelling, and it was the contrast between him yelling and the door slamming shut immediately into, street noise. Really cool.
Yeah. And there's a thing near the beginning after they do the whole after they leave that scene where they do the news on the march thing, the newsreel, then they show the part with that like cockatoo or whatever, like screaming right at the camera at the start.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's pretty cool too.
That actually scared me the first time. It was so loud. Like, whoa, shit! It was like a jump scare.
Yeah. And then there's just a few things, like a few times, like when he meets Susan in the apartment, there's a lot of different close-ups being used there as they do their back and forth conversation. And we could go on about that. But I think that'll do. But I can certainly understand why it has the reputation it has. And it's a very powerful film. Probably the thing that impressed me the most, really, we've been focusing on him as a filmmaker and director, and obviously the last episode we did was to focus on him as an actor. But I can't overstate how good he is in this as an actor. As a man of 25, so well pulling off a man of, much later years in such convincing fashion with, not really a ton of makeup or anything like that. He just seems to get it across, the way he carries himself, the way he talks. It's all just so convincing. I really like it. Like, I'll say it right now. I know I'm not an actor anyway, but even if I was an actor, when I was 25, I wouldn't know how to act. Like, I wouldn't know how an older man would act or move or talk, but he just seemed to know, which really impressed me.
Yeah, absolutely.
But anyway, I'm really glad we did get to do it, because it is, of course, a big, super important film. It's one of the most important films ever made. Even if somebody sees it and doesn't like it, you can't say it's not important. It had just a massive effect on film as a medium going forward. There's almost nothing that doesn't take something from it because of so many of its great techniques and narrative devices, et cetera, et cetera. And Wells will always kind of be the ultimate example of starting on a really high note, of just like bursting onto the scene like with a masterpiece. I mean, you could say the same about, I don't know, maybe a rock band that came out with a really great first album or something. But yeah, his career is very interesting, and we're not done talking about it because we're going to do one more episode on him, and then maybe we can say some, summing up stuff about his career as a whole. But as far as Citizen Kane goes, it really is a spectacular film that just blows me away by how bold it was to just come onto the scene as an unknown guy, more or less, who has all these expectations, and to do such an ambitious film and pull it off so well, and do so many interesting things in it. Again, this isn't a big epic. This wasn't a movie with a huge budget. This wasn't a movie where you're adapting like a well-known book or something. This was a completely original story that he'd come up with, that he wanted to do. And I don't know, sometimes everything just sort of goes right on a movie. It doesn't always happen. And I'm sure, there was probably wasn't a completely smooth production, but at least the final product is there, and it's great.
Yeah.
So we will conclude our small Orson Welles series with The Other Side of the Wind, which I still haven't watched, which I'm very interested in, because this will be Welles at the end of his career, more or less, as a filmmaker. The film got just released a couple months ago, but technically it was all pretty much shot in the mid-'70s through a few years while he was going back and forth on other projects. Has his friend, the other director, John Huston, in the role. And I guess it was supposed to be sort of his commentary on kind of like what the new era of film was like, because it was kind of like that was supposed to be representing sort of himself as the old era of the director from the 40s, etc. And now you had the new wave from the 60s and into the 70s of these newer directors. And it was supposed to be something like that, about sort of the converging of the two worlds. Peter Bogdanovich is in there too, and I guess would represent the younger director. But as far as I know, Welles was not critical. He was very interested and excited by the new scene. Like, he didn't want to be seen like as some dinosaur just doing old stuff. He wanted to be doing the new stuff too. And I hear that. I mean, again, it's impossible to judge the movie exactly, because this is not necessarily what Welles envisioned, because this is put together well after his death. But I mean, it's all stuff he shot, so we'll see what it is. It's supposed to be fairly artsy and avant-garde. It seems to just be about an old-time director who's trying to make a new style film. It's kind of like a film within a film in that way. And we'll see how it happens. I've seen some little snippets of it in the documentary, They'll Love Me When I'm Dead. And I don't know, it looks pretty interesting and entertaining. And he seemed to really have a lot of fun doing it. They have a lot of shots of people laughing and smiling and stuff. So despite the fact that they were always worried about money and not knowing what they're going to do, and he had such a weird, irreverent way of doing it, because they'd be like, okay, today we're going to shoot this scene, and the next day, what about this scene? He'd be like, forget about that. Okay, we're going to do this. He was always on to the next thing and really excited and stuff, which is probably part of the reason why it didn't get finished. But he would just seem to really be making shit up as he went. So I'm really interested to see exactly what it's going to look like. So that should be pretty cool. It'll definitely be a different departure from the other movies that we did, which were all from the 40s. So now we're jumping well ahead to the 70s. So be quite interesting. I don't think Welles himself is in this movie. Instead, he's using John Huston as sort of a stand-in for himself. But anyway, so that was Citizen Kane, the Citizen Kane of film, no doubt. And we thank you so much for being with us. And hopefully next week we can get The Other Side of the Wind in and wrap up on Welles. Although, like we say when we do these series, it doesn't necessarily close the book forever on doing a movie by the person. It's very possible we'll do an Orson Welles movie again in the future. I would very much like to do The Trial. And also a movie I'm thinking that we could do sometime soon, because I like it, and also because we talk a lot about Tim Burton and stuff, is the movie Ed Wood. Actually, he's not important in it, but Orson Welles is a character in that movie. I can't remember who plays him. It's been so long since I've seen it. Or was it that Vincent guy that we were talking about, the guy that played the Kingpin? Was that him? I think it might have been.
I'm not sure. Okay. I know the character you're talking about.
Yes, it is. Vincent D'Onofrio, or whatever his name is. Yeah, he's the one. Yeah, he's the guy that plays the Kingpin in the Daredevil Netflix, who I like so much. But yeah, he's the one that plays Welles in Ed Wood. So I'm thinking that could be a good movie to do sometime in the future too, because I know I talk a lot of shit about Tim Burton, and he does piss me off. But Ed Wood's one I really like, and I think is really interesting. Plus, it's always fun to talk about movies that are kind of about the movie industry. And I mean, Ed Wood is a really interesting character in his own right. So yeah, I think that'll be a good future episode at some point too. But for now, we're still with Welles, so join us next week for The Other Side of the Wind. And we thank you very much for watching. That is Jay. I am Cole. Thanks so much, and we'll see you again. Peace out.